Chapter 1361. What is Nye Tian doing? Everyone was stunned and confused when they saw Nye Tian suddenly release a giant dragon. Nye Tian ignored the others and stepped forward. He formed a seal with his hands and activated the Annihilation Earth seal. The ground under his feet suddenly shook and was lifted up in the next moment. The three-live stone also rushed into the sky. I have to move the three-live stone high up in the sky. Nye Tian had an idea. The crimson golden dragon rolled its body and rushed into the sky with the three-live stone. Although there was a sword-will barrier around the three-live stone, and Nye Tian couldn't get close, he still had a way to move the three-live stone off the ground. Although the three-live stone was powerful, it couldn't destroy anything if it exploded in the sky. In the sky, the crimson golden dragon let out a deafening roar and rushed into the sky. In the blink of an eye, it was tens of thousands of meters in the sky. Nye Tian looked down and estimated that it was about time. He flapped his wings and left in a flash. However, he was still worried and wanted to control the crimson golden dragon to move the three-live stone higher in the sky. However, at that moment, the three-live stone suddenly shook. It could no longer withstand the pressure of the huge sword will. With a loud bang, it collapsed. Boom! In the sky, a huge explosion was heard. The three-live stone suddenly collapsed, and a terrifying wave of air rushed in all directions. It was huge and rolled like a stormy sea. Amidst the rolling waves, endless sword intent was whistling, cold and murderous. In the next moment, an ear-piercing sound was heard in the air. The sword will bombarded the body of the golden dragon, and the dragon's body was torn apart inch by inch. The horrible sword will rushed into the dragon, which was extremely sharp. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He felt that something was wrong, and his heart sank. The crimson golden dragon had absorbed too much sword will and lost control. Boom, boom, boom. Then, the crimson golden dragon could no longer withstand the pressure of the sword will and exploded. Dragon chi filled the air for tens of thousands of meters. Nye Tian's body trembled slightly, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The dragon vein in his body was severely damaged. What a powerful force, he murmured. His body moved, and he retreated 10,000 meters away. His current strength was stronger than that of a lower deity. The power of the crimson golden colossal dragon was terrifying, but it couldn't withstand the impact of the three-live stone's sword intent. At this moment, the might of the three-live stone's explosion was even stronger than when Shi Wuxian activated the devil-devouring heaven seal. Nye Tian could feel the enormous sword intent rushing towards him. It was boundless, making it impossible for him to dodge, so he could only take it head-on. Fortunately, his martial body was strong enough to withstand the impact of the sword intent. High up in the sky, in addition to the surging sword will, the countless sword spirits below seemed to have sensed something and went berserk, letting out clear sword cries. In an instant, the sword cries shook the heavens and earth, and the sword will filled the endless void. Right at this moment, Nye Tian suddenly felt that the sword intent within his body had actually become berserk as well. His blood and vital energy roiled incessantly, as if they were about to charge out of his body. What terrifying power of the sword intent! Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, but the next moment, the corners of his mouth slightly curled up, revealing a smile. He suddenly felt that the sword intent within his body was actually unceasingly strengthening, as if the sword intent that burst forth from the three-live stone had a strong impact on his sword intent. Divine sword intent. In the next moment, Nye Tian immediately understood, and his eyes trembled violently. The sword principle inheritance within the three-live stone was left behind by an ancient god realm martial artist, and its sword intent contained a terrifying divine sword intent. At this moment, as Nye Tian absorbed the divine sword intent, his sword intent would naturally continue to strengthen. Boom! Just as Nye Tian reacted, a terrifying sword aura rushed out of his body, faintly condensing into a sharp sword that shot into the sky. I've broken through. Nye Tian instantly reacted, and his sword principle realm broke through again from the advanced sword ultimacy to the ultimate sword ultimacy. Breaking through in the sword ultimacy realm was originally very difficult, and it required the accumulation of sword intent to become stronger. Tian had just advanced to the advanced sword ultimacy not long ago, and now that he had once again advanced to the ultimate sword ultimacy, it was enough to show how terrifying the divine sword intent was. At the same time, there were actually countless sword auras that shot into the sky from below. Tian frowned and instantly understood that the other swordsman's sword principle realm had also been stimulated by the divine sword intent, and they had also broken through. Huff! Tian let out a long breath of impure air and looked into the distance. Even further up in the sky, there were sword auras rising. It turned out that unknowingly, the sword intent that burst forth from the three live stone had actually spread to the entire heaven realm. The heaven realm was extremely vast, with a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles, and the sword intent within the three live stone was truly terrifying. This time, all the swordsmen in the heaven realm benefited from Cher's awakening of the Wan Jian bloodline. At the same time, in a barren mountain in the desolate heaven unaging lands, on top of a towering precipice, a skinny figure stood upright. As if he had sensed something, his eyes revealed a burning light. If Tian was here, he would be able to recognize that this person was none other than Sword Evil Dugu Ni. After Dugu Ni witnessed Tian's power previously, he went into hiding and never showed his face again. He had been bitterly cultivating in seclusion, hoping to borrow the power of the Dusk Blade Heart Flame to break through to the deity realm. The sixth demon fire, Dusk Blade Heart Flame, contained sword intent, and it was a divine sword intent. Dugu Ni had already sensed that after merging with the Dusk Blade Heart Flame, an even more terrifying sword intent was born in his body. He did not know about the existence of divine sword intent, so he did not know what this sword intent was. He wanted to use this sword intent to break through to the deity realm, but he was still a little lacking, and he had never succeeded. Dugu Ni thought that if he had merged with the complete Dusk Blade Heart Flame back then, he would definitely be able to break through to the deity realm. And just when he was feeling very depressed, he sensed a sword intent of the same attribute appearing in the void. This simply made him wild with joy. This sword intent is very terrifying. It seems to be even more terrifying than the Dusk Blade Heart Flame sword intent. It can definitely help me advance to the deity realm. Dugu Ni felt the enormous sword intent in the void. His whole body released a flame-like sword intent. It began to frantically absorb the surrounding sword intent. As the sword intent in Dugu Ni's body became more and more intense, he was shocked to discover that a sword intent whirlpool had actually appeared in his body, and it was gradually solidifying. At this moment, Dugu Ni felt a brand new realm that he had never felt before. Dugu Ni was not stupid, and he instantly understood something. His heart suddenly trembled, and he exclaimed two words, Godhead. That's right, Dugu Ni actually borrowed the three life stones' sword intent to condense Godhead. Becoming a deity in the heaven realm's divine realm, Dugu Ni's talent was indeed heaven-defying. And at another place in the heaven realm's divine realm, in a valley, a figure similarly stood up, his expression shocked and horrified. This person was none other than Sword Slaughterer Ghostly Scar. Similarly, borrowing the three life stone's sword intent, he also condensed Godhead and advanced to the deity realm. Chapter 1362. Heaven Realm Divine Domain. Boom! Boom! Two soaring sword intents rose at the same time in two places that were tens of thousands of miles apart. They soared into the sky and actually created two spatial cracks in the void. The same sword intent attribute. Dugu Ni and Ghost Scar were in two different places, but they let out the same exclamation. Both of them were extremely intelligent people and instantly understood that the other party had also advanced to the divine realm. Ghost Scar, since you have advanced to the divine realm, you will definitely go to the domain. We will definitely meet again. I must snatch the other half of the Twilight Blade Heart Flame. Dugu smiled coldly. The corners of his mouth curled up, and his eyes were cold and murderous. Dugu had already seen how terrifying the twilight blade heart flame was. Therefore, he must snatch the other half. Only the complete twilight blade heart flame could fully display the power of the sword intent within. Dugu, I'll be waiting for you. On the other side, Ghostkar thought of the same thing. As if he heard Dugu's words, he muttered. The eyes hidden under the black robe flickered strangely. Now, let me try out the Heaven Wasteland Palace. My good teacher and my good senior brother, did you miss me? On top of the cliff, Dugu's eyes flickered for a moment. A chill surged within him, making him look extremely cold. He actually wanted to make a move against the Heaven Desolate Hall. After speaking, Dugu's figure moved, turned into a stream of light, and charged towards the Heaven Desolate Hall. At the same time, high up in the sky of the Divine Cold Palace, Nyetian suddenly saw two sword intents soar into the sky. They were obviously more terrifying than the other sword intents. Moreover, they contained an aura that he was extremely familiar with, the Twilight Blade Heart Flame. Looks like Dugu and Ghostkar have advanced to the Divine Realm with the help of the three live stone sword intent. Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly. His heart trembled slightly, and his expression was somewhat complicated. Ghostkar's advancement to the Divine Realm was a good thing. However, Dugu was a cruel and bloodthirsty person. His advancement to the Divine Realm was definitely not a good thing. Nyetian had never underestimated Dugu. This person was extremely sinister and cruel. Most importantly, he knew when to advance and retreat. He knew when to be arrogant and when to be low-key. Moreover, Nyetian felt that the power of Dugu's 100 Void Body had yet to be developed. Once he advanced to the Divine Realm, the power of the 100 Void Chi would truly be released. Brother Mo and Brother Jio will also absorb some sword intent, but they haven't fused with a treasure like the Twilight Blade's Heart Flame. It's not very likely for them to advance to the Divine Realm. Nyetian couldn't help but sigh. At this moment, even he had not advanced to the God Realm. Although he had absorbed some of the God E-Sword essence, the God E-Force contained in his body was not strong enough. Not only that, out of all the different types of spirit intent force he had, holographic divine imprints, thunderbolt divine imprints, sword imprints, etc., only that trace of sword imprint was the spirit intent sword intent, the rest weren't. Master! Just then, a familiar voice came out. Nyetchio's figure appeared. Nyetchio. Seeing that Nyetchio was fine, Nyetian relaxed. Nyetchio. Seeing that Nyetchio was fine, Nyetian relaxed. Nyetian suddenly raised his head and looked at the place where the sword intent was the densest. A beauty stood in the center of the sword intent. It was as though a sword had descended to the world. It was a peerless talent that could shake the world. Cher! Nyetian looked at the familiar girl in front of him and called out. Cher stood there, her eyes as clear as water. Like a newborn baby, she was as innocent as snow and as pure as ice. Nyetian thought that everything was over. He took a step forward and wanted to walk over. However, at that moment, the sword intent in the surrounding space began to surge violently, gathering toward Schwer. In a moment, Cher seemed to have become a black hole of sword intent, swallowing all the sword intent. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The sword intent in the surroundings surged into Cher's body frantically, and a terrifying rumbling sound came out from the sky. Seeing this, Nyetian could not help but frown, and his eyes could not help but flicker. When everyone on the ground saw that, their faces were overwhelmed with shock, and their expressions were completely sluggish. Too many inconceivable things had happened today, and everyone was already numb to it. Nyetian felt the sword intent surging frantically all around him, his eyes tensed up, his heart in his throat, afraid that something might happen to Cher. In the blink of an eye, all the sword intent was swallowed by Cher. The peerless figure stood in the sky like a sharp sword, spanning across the heaven and earth. Bang! Just as all the sword intent converged, Cher's body trembled strangely. Following that, a burst of sword force was released and soared into the sky. What a terrifying sword force. Seeing that, Niet Tian frowned and couldn't help but exclaim. This sword force was extremely terrifying, far more terrifying than the sword force produced by Duguan and Goskar when they became gods and it soared into the sky. Everyone's heart trembled violently, and their eyes followed the sword force. Kaboom! The sword force condensed into a huge sword shadow, which rushed to the end of the heaven realm and bombarded the void. Suddenly, the heaven and earth shook, and a terrifying space-time crack appeared. As the space-time crack appeared, a space-time storm surged out, and the sword shadow was sucked into the space-time crack, disappearing in an instant. In an instant, everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. The countless sword spirits floating in the air landed on the ground one after another, and were controlled by the swordsmen on the ground. Cher's figure stood high up in the sky, and suddenly, she swayed and fainted. Cher! Niet Tian's figure flashed, and he flashed over to hug Cher. He felt the latter's aura, and everything was normal, so he relaxed a lot. However, at the same time, in the upper realms of the heaven realm, the god realm, Red Moon Divine Palace, Stargazing Hall. An old figure stared at the stargazing array above the hall with a dumbfounded expression. The stargazing array corresponded to the hundreds of plane worlds under the god realm. The heaven realm god realm was just one of the hundreds of plane worlds under the god realm. The old man magnified the stargazing array and stared at the heaven realm god realm. His divine sense kept flowing into the array, and gradually, 3 sword forces appeared in the array. Eldritch Song, what happened? At this moment, a vigorous voice sounded, and then a figure appeared. If the Emperor of Dark Hell, Yi Qinghai, was here, he would immediately recognize that the person was none other than his little brother in the Dark Sea Dark Prison, Qi Yefeng. At this moment, Qi Yefeng had another identity, the Palace Master of the Red Moon Divine Palace. Palace Master, come and see. Stargazing Hall, Elder Tsang Yu saw Qi Yefeng appear and exclaimed excitedly. Qi Yefeng took a step forward and came directly to the stargazing array. When he saw the 3 sword forces that appeared in the array, he was stunned. After a few seconds, Qi Yefeng finally reacted and said with a face full of shock, "Someone became a god in the plane world." In the plane world, god realm was extremely rare, almost negligible. Since ancient times, those who could become a god in the plane world were all monstrous geniuses. Yes, 3 people became gods at the same time. Song Yu calmed down and nodded. 3 people. Qi Yefeng was stunned for a moment, and after a long time, he reacted and asked in surprise, "Elder Tsang, which plane is this?" "The 14th plane under the god realm, the heaven realm god realm," Song Yu said with a smile on his face, because the heaven realm god realm was a plane under the control of the Red Moon Divine Palace. Chapter 1363. Shocking God Domain, Red Moon Divine Palace, Stargazing Hall. Qi Yefeng's first reaction when he heard that someone had become a god in the Heaven Realm's Divine Realm was to be stunned. It was already very difficult to become a god in a domain, but becoming a god in a plane world was no different from ascending to the heavens. The first person that Qi Yefeng thought of who could achieve such a feat was Niet Tian, because the latter had the fiend god nascent embryo. "Palace Lord, are you all right?" Stargazing Hall Elder Song Yu asked in confusion when he saw Qi Yefeng's expression change. The Heaven Realm's Divine Realm was a plane attached to the Red Moon Divine Palace. It was a good thing that someone had become a god, so why was Qi Yefeng panicking instead? Oh no! Qi Yefeng's face darkened, and he cried out in shock. He guessed that Niet Tian must be one of the 3 who had become a god in the Heaven Realm's Divine Realm. This was what made him panic the most. Niet Tian becoming a god was definitely a huge blow to the Red Moon Divine Palace, because Qi Yefeng was still counting on Niet Tian to achieve a good result in the grand competition of the 12 shrines. The grand competition of the 12 shrines was a contest between young martial artists. It was divided into 2 parts, one for Heavenly Emperor realm martial artists and the other for Lower God realm martial artists. Qi Yefeng wanted Niet Tian to participate in the competition between Heavenly Emperor realm martial artists. If Niet Tian became a god, he would lose the qualification and could only participate in the competition between lower god realm martial artists. The level of battle between lower god realm martial artists was completely different. It was a battle between peak lower god realm martial artists. The day of the competition was approaching, and there were only 3 months left. Tian was only an early-stage lower god. How could he fight with a peak lower god realm martial artist? Thinking of this, Qi Yifeng's forehead was sweating profusely, and his whole body seemed to be trembling. Song Yu saw Qi Yifeng's reaction and looked at him in confusion, but he did not dare to say anything. After a while, Qi Yifeng finally calmed down. He let out a long sigh and began to carefully observe the 3 sword moves on the stargazing great array. No matter what, it was a good thing that someone became a god in the heaven realm. Elder Tsang, this sword momentum is clearly stronger than the other 2 sword momentum. What's going on? At this moment, Qi Yifeng saw that something was wrong and pointed at one of the sword momentum. The strongest sword aura was actually several times stronger than the other 2. They were both early-stage low god realm experts who had just condensed their godheads, but the difference in their aura and aura was so obvious. This was very unusual. Yes, Palace Master is right. It was obvious that Song Yu was an expert in observing the stars. Moreover, the stargazing grand array in front of them was created by him. Thus he could see more clearly than Qi Yifeng. Song Yu nodded with a smile, saying, Lord Palace Lord, judging from these 3 sword forces, these 3 people's godheads are much stronger than the average god realm cultivators who have just condensed their godheads, and the strongest sword force is stronger than the other 2. According to this old man's judgment, although the owner of the strongest sword force is an early-stage low god realm expert who has just condensed his godhead, his battle prowess is definitely comparable to a mid-stage low god realm expert, and he could even fight a late-stage low god realm expert. This, Qi Yifeng couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air when he heard Song Yu's words. His eyes became slightly sluggish. When a cultivator reached the god realm, the gap between each small realm was like a chasm between heaven and earth. Those who could cross a small realm to fight were already monstrous geniuses. This person had just condensed his godhead, yet he could already cross 2 small realms to fight. How terrifying! Song Yu nodded again. He suddenly let out a strange laugh and said, What's even more strange is that the aura of the other 2 sword forces is somewhat similar to that of the strongest sword force. It seems that the other 2 were able to become gods because they were stimulated by the strongest sword force. Song Yu was indeed worthy of being a stargazing grandmaster. He could see so many things just from the sword forces. He was right. The reason Dugu Ni and Go Scar were able to become gods was all thanks to Shui. Elder Tsang continued to observe. You must inform me as soon as the 3 of them arrive at the domain. Qi Yifeng calmed down, and a strange smile hung on the corner of his mouth. If the strongest person was really as Song Yu said, perhaps the day of the Divine Palace Grand Competition would be the day when the Red Moon Divine Palace would make a comeback. Yes, Song Yu nodded solemnly. Godfiend nascent embryo brat, I've kept a shocking secret for you. Don't let me down. Qi Yifeng's eyes flickered as he said in his heart. The reason why he kept the secret of the Godfiend nascent embryo was not only to repay Yi Qinghai's kindness, but also for the future of the Red Moon Divine Palace. One had to know that if the Godfiend nascent embryo was known by those old monsters, the Red Moon Divine Palace would face a disaster of destruction. Although the Heaven World's God Realm was a subsidiary plane of the Red Moon Divine Palace, it didn't mean that the cultivators of this plane had to join the Red Moon Divine Palace. However, the Red Moon Divine Palace had a great advantage because when the cultivators of the Heaven World's God Realm entered the God Realm, the first place they would come to was under the jurisdiction of the Red Moon Divine Palace. At the same time, in the God Realm's cold Divine Palace's Stargazing Hall, 2 figures stood in the hall. These 2 people were the cold Divine Palace's Palace Master Lung Feng and the Stargazing Hall's Elder Qin Li. The cold Divine Palace was also one of the 12 Divine Palaces of the God Realm. Each of the 12 Divine Palaces had a stargazing formation that constantly monitored everything in the plane world. Elder Qin informed the people of the Cold Wind Hall to enter the land of the Red Moon. We must find these 3 people, Lung Feng said solemnly. His face was cold and murderous. If they are willing to join the cold divine palace, that would be the best. If not, just kill them. This. Qinli was slightly stunned, and his face was filled with shock. Of course, he knew that the Cold Wind Hall was the Cold Divine Palace's secret division. They mainly dealt with some difficult problems and sometimes even assassinated people. Palace Master, the Heaven World's God Realm, is a subsidiary plane of the Red Moon Divine Palace. I'm afraid it's inappropriate for us to interfere. Qinli hesitated and finally said, There's nothing inappropriate about it. Lung Feng laughed and said, The Crimson Moon Divine Palace is already a walking corpse and will soon be eliminated by the 12 celestial palaces. It will be completely removed from the shocking God domain. It is such a pity that such a talented martial artist appeared in the Heaven domain. Even if we don't take action, the other divine palaces will. Qinli was stunned and then nodded. Palace Master is right. This subordinate will go to the Cold Wind Hall right now. Then, Qinli's figure flashed, and he left. Lung Feng looked at the stargazing formation, and his eyes flickered. He smiled coldly and said, Qi Yefeng, it's time for the grudge between us to end. This time's grand competition of the 12 divine palaces will be the death of the Red Moon Divine Palace. And you, Qi Yefeng, will also die in my hands. The God Realm's God Realm. Everyone knew that the Red Moon Divine Palace and the Cold Divine Palace were enemies. Qi Yefeng and Lung Feng were mortal enemies who would not rest until one of them died. Back then, when the 12 divine palaces were fighting, Qi Yefeng's son died in Lung Feng's hands. Lung Feng's sister also died in Qi Yefeng's hands. Now that the Red Moon Divine Palace was weak, Lung Feng naturally wouldn't let go of such a good opportunity. In the grand competition of the 12 divine palaces, he wanted to destroy the Red Moon Divine Palace in one fell swoop. Anyone who wanted to join the Red Moon Divine Palace was an enemy of the Cold Divine Palace. At the same time, the other divine palaces also made their moves. Chapter 1364. Of course, Nietian knew nothing about what happened in the God domain. After Cher fainted, Nietian brought her to the room, and after confirming that she was fine, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. Everyone can disperse. Nietian walked out of the room, and seeing that everyone was waiting outside the room, he smiled faintly and said, Everyone's tensed heart immediately relaxed, and after bidding farewell to Nietian, they left. Nietian. At this time, a beautiful figure appeared, hurrying to Nietian's side. It was Emo Rushi. In the past few months, Emo Rushi had been in closed-door cultivation, and Cher's awakening made her feel something, so she ended her closed-door cultivation early. Rushi. When Nietian saw Emo Rushi appear, he smiled faintly and said, It's nothing, Cher is fine, just temporarily unconscious. Oh. Emo Rushi let out a long sigh, and her nervous little face relaxed a lot. Rushi, you're already at the peak of the Heavenly Emperor realm. Nietian's divine sense sensed Emo Rushi's body, and he could not help but laugh. Emo Rushi smiled. Her gentle eyes flickered, and then said, I'll go see Cher first. Nietian nodded with a smile, and watched Emo Rushi walk into the room. At this time, Nietian and Nietchio were the only 2 left in the small courtyard. This time, when Cher awakened, the 3 live stone was destroyed, but the result was not bad, and the most important thing was that Cher was fine. Master. Nietchio looked at Nietian, his eyes slightly trembled, and said, That seal was given to me by the Sword Elder. He told me to inject it into Miss Cher's body when she awakens. Nietian nodded slightly. He guessed correctly. The seal was indeed given to Nietchio by the Sword Elder. When he was in the room just now, Nietian had sensed the seal in Cher's body and discovered that the seal was suppressing Cher's strength. Nietian was very puzzled. Why would the Sword Elder leave behind a seal to suppress Cher's strength? Nietian, you still don't know Cher's true identity, right? Just when Nietian was puzzled, Sakura's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. You know her identity? Nietian frowned, his face suddenly darkening. Previously, Sakura had disappeared when Shui, or had awakened her myriad swords bloodline. Now, he had suddenly reappeared. This made Nye Tian very unhappy. Of course I know, it's just that I can't tell you right now. Sakura let out a strange laugh and said, the seal you were talking about is indeed used to suppress the little girl's strength, but it didn't have the desired effect. What do you mean? Nye Tian frowned and asked in surprise. Sakura let out another strange laugh and said, I think the person who left behind the seal wanted to suppress the little girl's strength to the heavenly emperor realm, but he definitely didn't expect that the 3 life meridians would actually fuse with Wan Jian's inheritance and form Wan Jian's bloodline. So the power of the seal didn't have the desired effect, and the little girl still condensed her divine spark and advanced to the god realm. If it wasn't for the suppression of the seal, I'm afraid the little girl's strength would at least reach the level of a mid-god, high god, or even over god. But now she only has the strength of an early low god. But this is also not bad. At least ordinary people can't see her true identity. Only the supreme experts might be able to sense that something is wrong. Hearing Sakura's words, Nye Tian couldn't help but frown, his face full of doubt. He didn't expect that the seal left behind by the Sword Elder would be so powerful, and the suppression on Cher was too strong. After absorbing Wan Jian's inheritance, Cher originally had the opportunity to directly reach the overgod level, but because of the seal, she became the current early low god. And at this time, Nye Tian was even more curious about Cher's identity. What exactly is her identity that even experts like Sakura and the Sword Elder were so secretive and didn't dare to say it? It seemed that the Sword Elder left that seal to prevent Cher's identity from being exposed. But he didn't expect that Cher would actually awaken Wan Jian's bloodline, so the suppression of the power of the seal wasn't as good as expected. Nye Tian, if you bring the little girl into the domain together, it's best not to let her see those supreme experts. If her identity is exposed, it will bring you a fatal disaster. Sakura said with a frown, and then his figure disappeared again. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and he had a surprised look on his face. Sakura always liked to say things halfway, making people scratching their heads. Master, is that seal okay? Nye knew that Nye Tian was talking with Sakura, and had been observing Nye Tian's expression and asked with a worried look. It's fine. Nye Tian smiled faintly. He believed that since the Sword Elder did this, there must be a reason. But he really wanted to know what was Cher's true identity, to be so mysterious. Master, there is one more thing I need to tell you. Nye suddenly thought of something and said with a frown, What is it? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment and asked in surprise. The Sword Elder also said that after Lady Cher awakens, there is a possibility. Nye face was a little embarrassed, and just as he was speaking, he was interrupted by a voice. Nye Tian, Cher is awake. Mo Rushi's voice suddenly sounded, but she was a little flustered. Nye Tian's face changed, and in a flash, he entered the room. Snow had already woken up. She was half sitting on the bed, but her eyes were filled with shock as she looked at her surroundings. Her clear eyes were filled with unconcealable fear, as if she was unfamiliar with everything around her. She was like a newborn baby, afraid of everything, yet eager to know everything. Nye Tian, Cher seems to have changed. She is always in a daze. Mo Rushi's beautiful eyes flickered as she frowned and said, Cher. Nye Tian took a step forward and called out lightly, who are you? Cher was startled. She looked at the silver-haired young man in front of her and subconsciously retreated backwards, appearing to be extremely afraid. This? Nye Tian froze on the spot. Cher actually did not recognize him. Cher, do you still remember me? Mo Rushi looked at Cher and asked gently. Cher shook her head, her face filled with doubt, but she was not afraid of Mo Rushi. Her eyes flickered as she looked at Mo Rushi, as though she was seeking protection. Mo Rushi sat down gently and said gently, Don't be afraid. We are all your friends. We will not hurt you. Under Mo Rushi's consolation, Cher calmed down and nodded her head. This? Nye Tian's mouth twitched. He then looked at Nye and asked, Cher lost her memories? Yes. Nye nodded his head and said, I was just about to tell you about this. The Sword Elder said that after Lady Cher awakens, she might lose her memories for a short period of time, but after a period of time, her memories will slowly return. After a period of time, yes, how long? Nie Tian was startled. He could not even reply. Nie Chio shook his head helplessly, expressing that he did not know either. All right. Nie Tian let out a long breath, his face filled with helplessness. Chapter 1365. Cher's amnesia caught Nie Tian unprepared, but fortunately for Cher, she trusted Mo Rushi. If not, Nie Tian would not know what to do. Nie Tian tried to talk to Cher, but the latter was extremely afraid of him and kept dodging him. Nie Tian had a look of helplessness and could only say to Mo Rushi, Rushi, Cher's current situation is somewhat troublesome. I will have to trouble you to take care of her. Mo Rushi nodded her head and consoled Nie Tian. Cher has only temporarily forgotten who you are. She will be fine after a period of time. Nie Tian smiled bitterly. There was nothing he could do right now. He could only wait and see after a while. Big sister, what's your name? At that moment, Cher looked at Mo Rushi and actually took the initiative to speak. She seemed to have a natural trust towards Mo Rushi, to the point of even relying on her. Mo Rushi smiled faintly and started to slowly talk to Cher, slowly introducing Nie Tian and the rest, and told them about what had happened between them. Hearing Mo Rushi's words, Cher could not help but look at Nie Tian. She still had a look of doubt, as though she did not believe that she had so many stories with the person in front of her. Nie Tian laughed helplessly and walked out of the room with Nie Chio. It could only be said that Mo Rushi's looks were too good. Even children had a natural trust in her. Nie Tian and Nie Chio walked out of the courtyard and prepared to see how the others were doing. Cher's awakening gave many people the opportunity to break through, especially Duanmu Lu and the other sword spirits, who benefited greatly. However, at this moment, a figure appeared in a hurry. Roa. Seeing Nie Yuro walking over, Nie Tian was startled, and his face darkened. Did something happen to Ni Jianming again? Big brother Nie Tian. Seeing Nie Tian, Nie Yuro cried out in shock and anxiously said, Ni Jianming is awake. He says he wants to see you. He's awake? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment, but he immediately reacted and said, Quickly take me to see him. After being unconscious for nearly 4 days, Ni Jianming finally woke up. Nie Tian really wanted to know if his memory had been awakened. Not long later, Nie Tian and Nie Chio arrived at a small courtyard and directly entered Ni Jianming's room. At this moment, Ni Zichan was also in the room and was talking to Ni Jianming. Nie Tian. Seeing Nie Tian walk over, Ni Zichan stood up and greeted him. Ni Jianming, you're finally awake. Nie Tian nodded and looked at Ni Jianming with a smile. If Ni Jianming didn't wake up, Nie Tian really didn't know what to do. Yes. Ni Jianming nodded and smiled, but his smile was a little complicated. He looked at Ni Zichun and the others and said, Sister, you and Rower can leave first. I have something to say to Mr. Nya. Ni Zichun's beautiful eyes flickered. She hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded and walked out of the room with Nye Yuro. Ni Jianming watched Ni Zichun and the others leave, then looked at Nie Tian and let out a long sigh. He smiled bitterly and said, Mr. Nya, I'm awake. You're awake. Nie Tian looked at Ni Jianming and frowned. He hesitated and said, Did you wake up from the coma? Or did you wake up from your memory? Vaguely, Nie Tian guessed that Ni Jianming was very likely to have awakened the memory of his previous life. Previously, Ni Jianming had been calling him Brother Nie Tian, but now he suddenly changed to Mr. That was unusual. Both. Ni Jianming nodded and said, Thank you so much for not dying under the absolute shadow prohibition. You've really awakened the memory of your previous life? Nie Tian was stunned and surprised. Cher had lost her memory, but Ni Jianming's memory had awakened. How interesting. Ni Jianming had awakened the memory of his previous life. In front of Nie Tian, he was no longer a young man, but an ancient demon saint. Thinking of this, Nie Tian couldn't help but feel nervous. One had to know that Ni Jianming had the ability to kill him in a second. A part of it has awakened. Ni Jiaming's reaction was very calm, not much different from before. He smiled and said, I already know who I am, and I remember a lot of things in the past. Just now, my sister told me about you and the Divine Dragon Clan. I know you're looking for the Dragon Spring Vein. You know where the Dragon Spring Vein is? Nietion's face darkened, and he asked nervously. I don't know. Unexpectedly, Ni Jiaming shook his head and said, I haven't awakened a part of my memory about the Dragon Spring Vein, but I remember this thing and the Guardian Clan. I think the thing the Guardian Clan is guarding is the Dragon Spring Vein. At this moment, Ni Jiaming hadn't awakened all of his memory, only a part of it. Nietion was stunned for a moment. Then he frowned and asked, Do you remember where the Guardian Clan is? I don't remember. Ni Jiaming shook his head again and said, But I think I can find that place. Nietion frowned and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. It seemed that things weren't as simple as he thought. So he asked, Did you ask me to come here because you wanted to say something? Yes. Ni Jiaming nodded, and his expression became solemn. He said, I heard from my sister that you want to enter the territory. Yes. Nietion nodded and asked, Is there a problem? Ni Jiaming's expression became a little gloomy. He said, If you enter the territory, you must be careful of an organization called Jueying Palace. Jueying Palace. Hearing these words, Nietion frowned. He wasn't unfamiliar with this name. He had even seen someone from Jueying Palace before, even though it was just a soul avatar. Nietzsche's physical body was formed from that soul avatar. Nietion still remembered that the Jueying Palace elder who had appeared for a short time was called Zhu Qinxiu. Zhu Qinxiu's soul avatar had the strength of a 9th-level heavenly emperor. He didn't know how strong his original body was. As far as Nietion knew, the true mastermind behind the destruction of the Divine Dragon Clan was Jueying Palace. Jueying Palace was a very powerful organization more than 600,000 years ago. Even now, I still don't know where this organization came from. Ni Jiaming's expression was solemn. If this organization still exists, I don't know how powerful it would be. All right, I'll be careful. Nietion nodded slightly. He knew very well that Ni Jiaming had asked him to pay attention to Jueying Palace not only as a reminder, but also to help him investigate Jueying Palace. Is there anything else? Nietion couldn't help but ask when he saw that Ni Jiaming seemed to want to say something. One more thing. Ni Jiaming suddenly looked up at Nietion and said, I want to see that dragon soul. Dishi. Nietion frowned, and his expression changed instantly. He hadn't expected that Ni Jiaming would want to see Dishi. Yes. Ni Jiaming nodded heavily, then let out a long sigh. What happened back then? The Dragon Rebel Clan let down the Divine Dragon Clan. I want to see Lord Dishi. Maybe I can help him recover his physical body. Recover his physical body. Nietion's eyes suddenly trembled. He said in shock, Is that true? Of course. Ni Jiaming laughed and said, I'm not completely sure, but at least I can help Lord Dishi recover some of his strength. Are you willing to let me see him? Nietion stood where he was, frowning. He was obviously thinking about something. Chapter 1366. In the room, Nietion looked at Ni Jiaming with keen eyes. The reason why he agreed to Ni Jiaming's request was that Ni Jiaming could restore Dishi's physical body. However, Nietion also had to consider the risks. Ni Jiaming's strength far exceeded his, and he had already awakened part of his past life's memory. He was no longer a teenager, so his mentality must be more complicated. Most importantly, Nietion still had no idea how strong Ni Jiaming was. Mr. Nietion, don't worry. I'm only at the peak of the middle celestial stage, and the vanishing shadow seal in my body has not been completely removed. My real combat power is only at the peak of the lower celestial stage. Moreover, my martial physique is affected by the 1,000 exquisite illusory seal. If I forcefully use my godhead without the support of the illusory seal, it will trigger the power of the extinction shadow restriction. Ni Jiaming saw through Nietion's worries and explained calmly. Nietion narrowed his eyes and said, You need to borrow the power of the 1,000 gem phantom seal to use the godhead, right? He had guessed that Jiaming's memory and strength could be preserved because of the 1,000-gem phantom seal. He was right. Yes. Jiaming nodded and said with a bitter smile, "Without the 1,000-gem phantom seal, my strength would at most be at the peak of the Heaven Emperor realm." I see. Tian's eyes flickered. He did not expect the 1,000-gem phantom seal to have such a great effect on Jiaming. It seemed that he had underestimated the power of the 1,000-gem phantom seal. Jiaming, now that you have awakened your memory, I want to confirm something. At this moment, Tian's face suddenly turned serious, and he said in a deep voice, "I want to know your attitude towards Roer." Although Nyuro was not Tian's biological sister, he had always treated her as his biological sister, so he did not want her to be hurt. Previously, Jiaming was just a young man who had his first awakening of love, but now he was an old monster who had lived for more than 600,000 years. His mentality was definitely different. Nothing has changed. Jiaming looked at Tian with a firm gaze and answered indifferently. Tian's eyes trembled. He did not expect Jiaming's answer to be so simple and firm. After thinking for a while, Tian finally said, Jiaming, I'm not a person who likes to threaten others. However, Roer is my younger sister, so I have to tell you that if you betray her, I will kill you regardless of whether you are Jiaming or mysterious dragon demon saint. I mean what I say. I won't let her down. Jiaming lifted his head to look at Tian. His eyes were extremely clear, without any impurities. He was no different from the youth from before. That's good. Tian nodded, then smiled faintly and said, I've been away from the 3,000 small world for some time. It's time for me to go back. When you want to see Emperor Shi, the sooner the better. Jiaming smiled faintly. Okay, 1 day later. Tian nodded slightly and walked out of the room without staying any longer. After Jiaming's memory was awakened, Tian felt an obvious change in him. Jiaming's style of speaking became much sharper, but his eyes did not change much. He was still as gentle as before. Tian could not understand. Jiaming's character was completely unlike that mysterious dragon demon saint who had destroyed the dragon tribe and the 12 ancient demon clans. Perhaps Jiaming was responsible for the survival of the dragon rebel tribe, so he had already seen through everything and was much calmer. Tian walked out of the courtyard and went to check on Duanmu Lu and the others. He was relieved to make sure they were all fine. Most of the people around Tian were eager to improve their strength. Li Yi and the others took the Tian Yuan elixir and began to cultivate in seclusion. Duanmu Lu and the others also improved a lot. They comprehended sword principle and entered the state of cultivation. There were fewer people around Tian, but he felt a lot more relaxed. These people's strength improved rapidly. In the future, they would have the opportunity to enter the territory. At that time, they would be a very powerful force. Tian returned to his room. He needed to check his strength. Influenced by Cher's awakening, his strength did not improve, but his sword principle strength had reached the ultimate sword profound meaning level. Tian sat cross-legged and looked inside his body. His primordial meridian and primordial spirit were all normal. But when his divine consciousness entered the Star River precinct, he found that the power of the heart of nothingness had become stronger. It seemed that the star power was gradually unable to suppress the heart of nothingness. The starlight in the Star River precinct was dimming, but the black flame of nothingness was becoming more and more violent. During this period of time, the heart of nothingness had been growing stronger, but the star power in Tian's body had not awakened again. Instead, it had been steadily suppressed. Under such circumstances, the heart of nothingness had become extremely violent. I need to enter the territory as soon as possible to find the boundary of the universe. Tian's eyes darkened slightly as he murmured. His divine consciousness came out of the Star River precinct and began to carefully check every meridian in his body. He was now in the stage of breaking through to the godly realm, so he had to be very careful. At this time, Tian suddenly discovered something strange. He found that his blood had turned dark gold. It seemed to flow in his blood vessels, not like blood, but like a golden river. Tion was taken aback, and his eyebrows furrowed. Is this the devil god bloodline? Although his god-fiend nascent embryo had not awakened, he could faintly feel that the god-fiend nascent embryo had begun to affect his body. Tion took a deep breath and focused his mind, feeling the blood vessels in his body more carefully. What he found next made him suck in a breath of cold air. He found that as the god-fiend blood surged in his body, the origin energy in his body was undergoing a strange change. It seemed to be transforming into bright spirit power. The god-fiend blood can transform origin energy into bright spirit power. Tion's eyes trembled violently, and his face was aghast. This discovery was too terrifying, and he was stunned on the spot. The god-fiend blood was indeed abnormal. At this rate, even if Tion did not enter the territory, he would still be able to condense Godhead and advance to the godly realm. At this time, Tion's god-fiend nascent embryo had not awakened, but he already had such an abnormal ability. If the nascent embryo awakened, who knew what kind of effect it would have on his body? In that case, I will try to condense god-fiend blood into Godhead. Tion became cold. He smiled and began to circulate the 9 extremities war god art. The blood vessels in his body also began to circulate slowly. At this time, his body emitted a golden luster, which was incomparably strange. The next day, Tion opened his eyes, which shone with a sharp light. He could clearly feel that the bright spirit power in his body had increased, and the rest of the bright spirit power was also gradually converging into the god-fiend blood. His martial body became even more powerful. At this rate, I will definitely advance to the godly realm in a month at most. Tion muttered with a faint smile. At this time, Tion seemed to have sensed something. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a token appeared in his hand. It was flashing nonstop. Chapter 1367. The everlasting ageless token was given to Tion by Old Man Tian Huang when he was negotiating with him to facilitate communication between them. At this moment, the everlasting ageless token suddenly flashed with a black light. It was obvious that Old Man Tian Huang wanted to send a message to Tion. Oh no! Tion's face darkened. He suddenly thought of something and spat out a name. Dugu Ni. When Cher awakened her Wan Jian bloodline yesterday, Tion already knew that Dugu Ni had used this opportunity to condense his divine spark. However, he didn't think much about it at that time. Now that the everlasting ageless token had reacted, he suddenly realized that Dugu Ni was going to attack the Heaven Desolate Hall. Although Dugu Ni was a member of the Heaven Wasteland Palace, he had always gone against the Heaven Wasteland Palace and had even framed them. Now that he had condensed his divine spark and advanced to the divine realm, he would definitely attack the Heaven Desolate Hall. Eyebrows furrowed, Tion exclaimed, "How could I have overlooked that?" Then, he blurred into action and flashed out of the room. "I have to rush to the Heaven Desolate Hall immediately. I hope it's not too late." Tion frowned. A scroll appeared in his hand, and he immediately opened it. This was the space-time scroll he obtained from Zhao Zi's interspatial ring. It was enough to break the space-time barrier of the Heaven Realm. Now, he wanted to change the space-time scroll and directly descend into the Heaven Desolate Hall. Tion's body moved. Sword Intent was released from his body and poured into the space-time spiritual array, forcibly changing some of the information in the spiritual array. Tion. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded. It was Mo Rushi and Cher who walked over. Mo Rushi couldn't help but be stunned when she saw Tion's nervous expression. Her little face also became flustered. "Rushi, I have some urgent matters to deal with. I don't have time to explain." Tion glanced at the two girls and then stepped into the space-time spiritual array. "Tion, where are you going?" Mo Rushi became even more flustered when she saw Tion's reaction. She took a step forward and entered the space-time spiritual array as well. "I want to go too." Seeing this, Shui let out a cry of surprise and entered the spirit formation as well. Tion was stunned. He didn't want to waste any more time and immediately activated the scroll. In the next moment, A terrifying space-time power appeared in the space-time spell formation, forming a space-time tunnel that pulled the three of them into it. In the next instant, the surroundings of the three of them changed, and they found themselves in a dense forest. Nietion's expression flickered as he scanned the surroundings with his soul awareness. This is the Heaven Desolation mountain range. He had forcefully changed the space-time scroll, so there was a slight error in the landing location. He did not land in the Heaven Desolate Hall, but in the Heaven Desolate mountain range. Fortunately, the Heaven Desolation mountain range was not far from the Heaven Desolation Palace. With Nietion's speed, it would only take him a few minutes to reach the palace. Rushi, share, let's go. Nietion didn't have time to explain anything. The meteor wings appeared on his back and wrapped around him, Emo Rushi and Schwer. With a stomp of his feet, he soared into the sky and turned into a streak of black flame as he flew toward the Heaven Desolate Palace. At the same time, a murderous figure stood in the sky above the desolate range. He held a black longsword in his hand, and his body emitted a strong battle intent. It was none other than the evil sword Dugu-ni. From today onwards, the desolate range will no longer exist in the Heaven Realm. The corner of Dugu-ni's lips curled into a sinister smile. He suddenly slashed out with the illusionary 100 forms, and a dazzling sword ray appeared, falling toward the desolate range. Rumble. With a loud bang, the infinite wasteland Great Hall trembled violently and was reduced to ruins. Countless screams were heard. Countless swordsmen of the desolate range died on the spot. In the next moment, countless figures soared into the sky and fled in all directions. Dugu-ni's eyes turned cold when he saw this scene. He said coldly, "Trying to escape? Do you want to ask the longsword in my hand?" As his cold voice fell, Dugu-ni stabbed out with his sword. It actually turned into countless strange sword shadows in the air, blotting out the sky and covering the earth, spreading out in all directions. Everywhere the sword shadow passed, miserable cries could be heard. Blood splattered everywhere, and it was an extremely tragic scene. Most of these people were below the Heavenly Emperor realm. How could they withstand the attack of Dugu-ni's sword intent? Ha ha! Die, all of you can die. Looking at the bloody scene around him, Dugu-ni did not have the slightest bit of pity in his eyes. Instead, he became even more berserk, laughing almost maniacally. It was as if the people in front of him were not his companions, but his mortal enemies. Dugu-ni was also a member of the Desolate Range Hall and had been taught by Old Man Tian Huang. It was hard to imagine that he had such hatred for the Desolate Range Hall. Ren Tian Huang, Sang Shan Xue, I know you're here. Come out. Dugu-ni laughed heartily towards the sky. With a low roar, he directly called out Old Man Tian Huang's name, following which he struck out with his sword. The enormous sword shadow descended like a mountain, directly pressing down. Rumble. On the ground, the sound of explosions rose and fell. The Desolate Range Hall was completely reduced to ruins. The ground instantly cracked, and terrifying ravines crisscrossed. Dugu-ni, you bastard. In the next moment, a furious voice sounded. Then, a figure soared into the sky and turned into a sharp sword shadow, charging towards Dugu-ni. Ren Tian Huang, you finally appeared. Dugu-ni stared at the silhouette as the corner of his lips curled up coldly. Killing intent erupted from his entire body. His silhouette flickered as sword intent radiated from his body, transforming into a gigantic sword silhouette that rushed down. In the void, the two sword shadows were like two primordial beasts that collided at high speed. Boom! In the next instant, the sound of an explosion rang out as the two sword shadows collided with each other. After that, one of the sword shadows directly shattered, and a figure was sent flying towards the ground. Although Old Man Tian Huang had the strength of a peak Heavenly Emperor, he was still too weak compared to Dugu-ni. He couldn't even withstand a single attack. Teacher. At this moment, a mournful voice sounded. Then, a figure appeared and caught Old Man Tian Huang in midair. My good teacher, good senior brother, you finally appeared. Dugu-ni stabilized his figure and stood in midair. He smiled coldly and revealed his killing intent. Teacher, Song Shanshua didn't care about Dugan and I. Looking at the dying old man Tian Huang in his arms, he howled in agony. Song Shanshua. Old man Tian Huang's breathing was weak. He used all his strength to say one sentence. He wanted Song Shanshua to run. Finishing his last sentence, Elder Tian Huang closed his eyes and the last wisp of vitality disappeared. Teacher, Song Shanshua screamed in pain. Sword intent erupted from his body and exploded in all directions. Old thing, you're finally dead. Dugu and I killed his teacher with one strike. There was no regret in his eyes, only endless joy. Dugu and I, you bastard, you killed my teacher. Song Shanshua raised his head and roared at Dugu and I in the sky. Killing one's father and teacher was a taboo. Song Shanshua didn't think that Dugu and I would be this cruel to even kill his teacher. So what if I killed my teacher? Dugu and I smiled coldly and said in a deep voice, when Rin Tian Huang passed the position of palace master to you, he should have thought of this moment. The ice-cold voice was actually bold and confident. A mere hall master's position had caused Dugu and I to be jealous for so many years. You bastard, I'll clean up the sect on behalf of my teacher today. Song Shanshua was furious. He roared and charged at Dugu and I. Chapter 1368. In the air, Dugu and I watched as Song Shanshua rushed towards him. Feeling the sharpness of Song Shanshua's sword, his lips curled up into a cruel smile. He even dared to kill his teacher. His senior brother was nothing in his eyes. Die! Dugu's lips twitched. The illusionary 100 forms slashed across the sky. A ray of black light appeared, and the murderous intent of the sword condensed into a giant black snake. It swallowed the sky and rushed towards Song Shanshua. Hum! Hiss! 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 The entire space shook and a muffled sound followed. The sword intent around Song Shanshua crumbled inch by inch. His silhouette paused in the air as he felt an enormous force pressing down on him from above, threatening to crush him into pieces. Song Shanshua could not resist this force. He howled in pain, and his silhouette shook violently. He felt like his entire body was about to be torn apart. My good senior brother, goodbye. Seeing this scene, Dugu and I let out a sinister laugh, his expression hideous and terrifying. However, before he could finish laughing, the space around him trembled strangely. Then, a ray of black light appeared and whistled downwards. It landed on Song Shanshua's body and formed a shield that enveloped him. In an instant, Song Shanshua felt the pressure around him lessen. His silhouette flashed, and he descended. The sudden turn of events caused Dugu's pupils to tremble. Then he came to his senses. The corner of his mouth trembled as he called out a name. Nietian. In the next moment, a silhouette appeared. At the same time, a giant sword shadow appeared and slammed into the giant black snake. Hum! A loud rumble resonated in the air. The sword shadow and the giant snake collapsed at the same time. An infinite amount of sword intent wreaked havoc in the air. The newcomer was none other than Nietian. His silhouette flashed, and he arrived next at Song Shanshua. His face was dark, and he said in a low voice, Headmaster Tsong, I am late. Master Nietian. When Song Shanshua saw Nietian again, all sorts of emotions welled up in his heart. Hot tears gushed out of his eyes. He was the one who sent the signal to Nietian. However, not much time had passed. It was not easy for Nietian to arrive in such a short time. If Nietian had come a few seconds later, Song Shanshua would have died under Dugu's sword and would have been even more miserable than Elder Tian Huang. Hall Master Tsong, leave Dugu and I to me. Nietian made sure that Song Shanshua's life was not in danger and signaled for him to step back. His silhouette moved, and he stepped into the air, facing Dugu and I. Nietian, long time no see. Dugu and I saw Nietian's face clearly. Eggy smiled, a teasing smile appearing at the corner of her mouth. A few months ago, he had witnessed Nietian's strength. At that time, he was indeed no match for Nietian. But now he had condensed his godhead and advanced to the godly realm, He was no longer afraid of Nyetian. Even if Nyetian did not appear, he would have gone to the divine cold hall to look for Nyetian. Dugu and I, you even killed your own teacher. You're worse than an animal. Nyetianling looked coldly at Dugu and I and spoke in a low voice. His eyes were filled with killing intent. Nyetian, save your breath. Dugu and I smiled coldly. Killing Rintian Wang is only the beginning. After the Heaven Desolate Hall, it will be you, then Imo, Qianjun, and the others. All of you must die, because I am the only one who can reach the peak of sword principle in the Heaven Realm. Is that so? Nyetian's eyes darkened. He had already sensed that Dugu Ni's strength had advanced to the godly realm. Nyetian, you are indeed strong, but it's a pity that your opponent is me, Dugu Ni. Dugu Ni smiled coldly. My name is Ni, and I will defy the heavens and Tao. Killing Rintian Huang is not only because of the hatred in the past, but also because after killing him, I will no longer have anything to hold me back. To me, everyone in this world is nothing but grass. There is no meaning in their existence. Hearing Dugu Ni's words, Nyetian couldn't help but frown. A faint chill ran down his spine. Dugu Ni was too ruthless. He killed without batting an eye. This kind of person was extremely terrifying when he gained strength. Thinking of this, Nyetian's eyes darkened and suddenly became determined. He must kill Dugu Ni. Nyetian, are you still my opponent now? Dugu Ni felt Nyetian's murderous intent, but he smiled coldly and disdainfully. A few months ago, Dugu Ni was afraid of Nyetian, but now he did not put Nyetian in his eyes at all. Whether I am your opponent or not, I will know after I try. Nyetian's eyes turned cold. Then the wings on his back fluttered, like a curtain that covered the sky. The whole heaven and earth shook violently. Nyetian's figure was extremely fast. His whole body was filled with murderous intent. He was like a sword that could destroy the heaven and earth, directly blasting towards Dugu Ni. Your aura isn't weak, much stronger than Rintian Wang, but that's all there is to it. Feeling Nyetian's aura, the corner of Dugu Ni's mouth twitched, following which he unleashed his 100 forms of demonic void. Black sword chi blossomed in the air, condensing into a giant skull. It roared, as if it wanted to devour everything in its path. 100 transformations, just like its name, it could transform into different forms of sword chi. At the same time, it was accompanied by a terrifying 100 void chi that could weaken the opponent's strength. Nyetian's expression flickered as he saw the gigantic skull charging at him. Dugu Ni's strength had exceeded his expectations. It was even more terrifying than the 1,000 flowing kills or even Vincent. Just this sword chi alone was something that Nyetian did not expect. But right now, Nyetian's sword had already been unleashed and could no longer be retracted. He could only brace himself and rush forward. Rumble. In the horizon, a thunderous rumble resounded. Nyetian's sword chi descended and was actually swallowed by that strange skull. This sudden scene caused Nyetian to frown. The wings on his back suddenly flapped, and he hurriedly retreated. Trying to escape, Dugu Ni smiled coldly. He pointed his sword forward, and a sword chi pierced through the air, like an arrow leaving the bow, emitting an air-piercing sound as it flew towards Nyetian. Nyetian's eyes trembled. Although his speed was also fast, he was still a step too late. In a moment of desperation, astral energy gushed out from his body, activating the heavenly star guardian. Boom! A muffled sound rang out as the sword chi bombarded the astral shield, shattering it. Nyetian's figure trembled as he was sent flying. Fortunately, the heavenly star guardian absorbed most of the impact. Nyetian's martial body was not injured. The meteor wings flapped madly, stabilizing his body in the air. Nyetian. Mo Rushi saw this scene from the side and couldn't help but exclaim. Cher, who was beside her, also frowned slightly. Her small face was twisted and she said in her heart, I clearly don't know who he is. Why do I feel inexplicable heartache when I see him injured? I'm fine. Nyetian stabilized his figure and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. His eyes were filled with killing intent. He sneered and said in a deep voice, "Dugu and I, it seems that I underestimated you. After condensing the Godhead, even your sword's spirit has changed, right?" Chapter 1369. Suppressing the Sword Realm. Upon hearing Duguni's words, Nietion's eyes trembled violently and his heart sank. It was no wonder that when he struck out with his sword just now, even though his sword intent was clearly weakened, it was as though his sword intent had been weakened in an instant. Dugu and I possessed the 100 virtual body. After he ascended to the divine realm, the 100 forms of the demonic void sword underwent a mutation and perfectly fused with the 100 virtual chi. While suppressing the strength of a martial artist, it also suppressed the martial artist's sword realm. Nietion felt that just now his sword realm had been suppressed by nearly an entire realm. It made him a swordsman with the ultimate profound meaning of sword, only able to display the level of the elementary profound meaning of sword. This was the reason why he was defeated so miserably by that one sword strike. The 100 virtual body and the mutated 100 forms of the demonic void sword are really terrifying, thought Nietion. Although the current Dugu and I was only an early-stage low god, his true battle prowess was on par with a mid-stage or even a late-stage low god. Nietion, do you still stand a chance against my mutated demonic void sword? Cold and disdainful smile appeared on Duguni's face. I'll say it again. Whether I stand a chance or not, I'll only know after I try, replied Nietion with a flat smile. His eyes were as deep as water, without the slightest ripple. Arrogant. Dugu and I creased his brows. What he couldn't stand the most was Nietion's perpetually calm demeanor. He let out a low roar and launched the 100 forms of the demonic void sword. The terrifying 100 virtual chi perfectly fused with the demonic void sword, roaring like a river bursting its banks. In an instant, the heaven and earth trembled and the wind and clouds surged as though doomsday had arrived. The heaven and earth turned dark and let out a mournful wail. The space trembled incessantly as though it was about to collapse. Nietion, this sword strike will take your life. Enjoy it. Amidst the rolling dark clouds, Duguni's cold voice rang out. In the void, a black sword shadow pressed over like a monster. The black sword light bloomed in the air, cold and murderous. At the sight of this, Nietion spread open his hands, and then 2 black vortexes appeared on his palms. Violent energy of the stars surged within them, and terrifying black flames of nothingness surged on the outside. In front of the 100 virtual body, Nietion's elemental meridians were suppressed. Using the Supreme Dragon Vein was clearly not a wise choice. However, his 10th origin meridian was not suppressed, so he had to use the Starry Sky ancient martial art. This time, Nietion was going to use the heaven and earth crafty Tao of the Starry Sky ancient martial art. Still want to resist? When Dugu and I saw the strange vortex on Nietion's palm, he smiled sinisterly and did not take it seriously in the slightest. As far as he was concerned, Nietion was definitely going to die at this moment, and he absolutely didn't have the slightest ability to resist. Heaven and earth crafty Tao, earth crafty reverse kill, heaven crafty absolute kill. Nietion ignored Duguni's mockery and murmured softly. He felt the energy of the stars and the heart of nothingness condense, and then both of his palms struck out. Boom! Boom! Suddenly, the 2 vortexes exploded and instantly condensed into 2 giant black snakes. They whizzed out, like a hidden dragon breaking out of the abyss, extremely ferocious. When the heaven and earth twin snakes appeared, the void suddenly shook, and the space was like a river that was being washed away, splitting into 2 sides, as if it was going to collapse in the next moment. What a terrifying aura! Song Shanxue saw this scene from afar, and his expression was extremely shocked, and his face became dumbfounded. He originally thought that even if Nietion appeared, he would not be able to defeat Dugu and I, because Dugu and I had become a celestial god, and Nietion was still a heavenly emperor realm warrior. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. But at this moment, The strength that Nyetian displayed was not the slightest bit weaker than Dugu and I. In fact, his aura was even stronger. Mo, Rushi, and Cher watched from the side, their little faces tense, afraid that something would happen to Nyetian. Nyetian stood high in the sky, his eyes calm and murderous. He believed that the heaven and earth path, combined with the power of the heart of nothingness, would definitely give Dugu and I a big surprise. At this time, Dugu and I also noticed something, and his brows slightly furrowed. He said in surprise, "How is this possible? It's a power that can ignore the weakening of the 100 hollow chi." He did not expect that Nyetian's body could actually release a power that could not be weakened by the 100 hollow chi. So what? You're just a heavenly emperor realm warrior. I'm a godly realm warrior. You are definitely not my opponent. Dugu and I frowned and sneered. He believed that the power of the godly realm would definitely surpass the power of a heavenly emperor. Boom! Boom! In the next moment, above the void, the two giant snakes and the black sword shadow collided with each other. Two violent explosions sounded out. The space suddenly shook, and a space-time crack suddenly appeared in the center. Terrifying space-time storms surged out. Rumble! A terrifying sound came out. The black sword shadow and the two black snakes were directly crushed under the space-time storm. Kill! However, Nyetian had already expected this scene. His eyes slightly sank, and then he flapped his wings. His figure flew straight up to the sky, and then he stabbed out with the sword in his hand. A black sword light whistled out, extremely sharp, and attacked Dugu and I. Dugu and I was a godly realm expert, and the heaven and earth path was also Nyetian's strongest move at this time. This level of collision, the space-time of the heaven world's deity realm, could not withstand. Nyetian knew that this would be the result, so he prepared in advance. However, Dugu and I was instantly stunned, and his reaction was a little slow. Dugu and I suddenly raised his head, and when he saw the sword descending on his head, his eyes trembled slightly. This sword, Nyetian used the Dark Star Ghost Kill, and combined with the power of the Heart of Nothingness. If it bombarded on Dugani's body, it would definitely destroy his physical body and even devour his godhead. The power of the Heart of Nothingness was definitely unimaginably terrifying. Nyetian, Dugu and I was stunned by the sudden sword, and then he roared in anger, but it was too late. At this moment, even if he wanted to attack, it was already impossible. Boom! The fatal sword fell with the intent to kill, wanting to kill in one hit. However, at this moment, something strange happened. A black whirlpool was suddenly released from Dugani's body, and in an instant, it expanded like a black hole and opened its dark mouth. In the next moment, the black sword shadow fell and was directly devoured by the black whirlpool, disappearing. In midair, Dugani's figure stood upright and scathed, and a cold smile hung on the corner of his mouth. The sudden scene made Nyetian frown, and he was shocked on the spot. What kind of technique did Dugu and I use to actually be able to block this sword attack? Right at this moment, Nyetian suddenly saw that one of Dugani's eyes had actually turned a deep black color. It was incomparably strange, as if it was a bottomless abyss, making people feel like they would be sucked in with just a glance. Nyetian suddenly understood something, and he sucked in a breath of cold air. His whole body trembled, and 4 words echoed in his mind. Devil's Knight's Eye. Chapter 1370. The Eye of the Devil's Knight. When these 4 words came out of Dugani's mouth, Nyetian's eyes suddenly trembled. He was not wrong. Dugu and I actually had one of the 10 great pupils, the Eye of the Devil's Knight. The Eye of the Devil's Knight was ranked 8th on the other pupil list. It was ranked behind the 7th other pupil, the Rainbow Pupil, but before the 9th other pupil, the Scar of the Dusk, and the 10th other pupil, the Purple Demon Eye. Nyetian never would have thought that Dugu and I had hidden his strength so deeply. He was actually the owner of the Devil's Knight's Eye. It seemed that Dugu and I had not revealed his true strength before. This was his true battle power. As for the Devil's Knight's Eye, Nyetian had only heard of it, but he did not know its true power. From the Devil's Knight's eye creating a black vortex that swallowed the fatal sword. It seemed to have a very strong swallowing ability. The eighth other pupil, Sangshan Shui, was also stunned at this time. He screamed, his entire body petrified. He and Dugu and I had known each other since they were young. They had known each other for hundreds of years, but he never knew that the latter actually had the Devil's Knight's eye. Dugu and I, not only was he fierce, but he was also very patient. Nie Tian, to be able to force me to this step, you are the first. At this time, Dugu Ni's eyes became cold. He stared at Nie Tian, suppressing a terrible anger in his heart. The Devil's Knight's eye, this was his most hidden trump card. Now that it was forced out by Nie Tian, he was extremely unhappy. But since you've seen my Devil's Knights, I don't think of leaving here alive today. Dugu and I smiled coldly. He then scanned the crowd and said in a cold voice, everyone here must die. The pupil of Devil's Knight was regarded as Dugu Ni's greatest secret, and he would never allow anyone else to know about it. You want to kill me? Let's see if you have the ability. Nie Tian exhaled deeply and calmed down. Just now, when Dugu and I used the Devil's Knight's pupil to forcefully take on his attack, blood actually seeped out from the corner of his eye. It seemed that the Devil's Knight's pupil wasn't as terrifying as he had imagined. Perhaps it was because the heart of nothingness was too terrifying, and it placed too much of a burden on the eye of the Devil's Knight. Die! Dugu and I bellowed and no longer had any scruples. A huge amount of 100 void chi gushed out of his body like raging waves, directly enveloping Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned slightly. He flapped his wings and hurriedly retreated. At this moment, he had consumed too much of his star energy and was already somewhat unable to continue. Moreover, his Yuan meridians and Sword Dao realm were being suppressed, so the situation was extremely disadvantageous to him. Boom! Dugu and I slashed out with his sword, and a black sword light blossomed in the air, turning into a sky full of sword shadows that bombarded Nie Tian. Nie Tian's speed was extremely fast, and at the same time, a sky-shrouding totem appeared behind him, condensing into a sky-shrouding enchantment, preventing the 100 void chi from invading his body. The weakening power of the 100 void chi was too strong. If it invaded his body, Nie Tian's strength would drop by several small realms. Bang, bang, bang. Endless muffled sounds rang out, and the sky full of black sword shadows bombarded down like a sky full of crows, landing on the sky-shrouding totem, forcing Nie Tian's figure to retreat again and again. He only had the power to defend, and had no power to fight back. Nie Tian, seeing this scene, Mo Rushi's eyes flashed as she let out a cry of shock, after which a pair of phoenix wings appeared behind her, transforming into a scarlet line of fire in the air. In the next instant, the silhouette of a phoenix appeared around her, and with a shrill cry, she directly rushed toward Dugu and I. Rushi! Nie Tian's figure stabilized, and suddenly saw Mo Rushi making a move. Immediately, his face sank, and he was extremely panicked. He repeatedly retreated just now because he was accumulating strength, preparing to fuse the crafty way of heaven and earth together to kill Dugu and I in one blow. However, Mo Rushi obviously made a wrong judgment of a situation, and in the future, Nie Tian would be defeated, so she couldn't help but make a move. At this moment, Mo Rushi already had the strength of a peak heavenly emperor, and she also had the body of a sage. Coupled with the inheritance of the ancient divine phoenix, her strength was faintly not weaker than an ordinary lower deity expert. However, the person she was facing was Dugu and I, who was far stronger than an ordinary lower deity martial artist. You're courting death. Just as Dugu and I was about to continue attacking Nie Tian, he suddenly saw a fire phoenix appear. The corner of his mouth twitched, and his eyes flickered with coldness. He directly stabbed out the 100 demonic forms, and a black sword shadow appeared like a giant mountain, pressing towards the fire phoenix. In the air, Mo Rushi suddenly felt the strength in her body weaken. Her beautiful eyes trembled, and a look of panic appeared on her delicate face. However, It was already too late, and she no longer had the chance to retreat. No! Seeing this scene, Niet Tion roared, and the void black flames on his body surged out like a volcanic eruption. He rushed over and slashed down with the sword Absolute Heaven Slash. Boom! In the void, a terrifying explosion sounded, and three powerful forces collided. Flames and sword will wreaked havoc in the air, and the whole world seemed to be on fire. Mo Rushi felt the violent waves of air rushing over, and her eyes flashed. She could no longer withstand it, and her body was sent flying. At this moment, the terrible sword was like maggots in the tarsal bone, pressing down on Mo Rushi. At this critical moment, a figure desperately rushed over and held Mo Rushi in his arms. The wings on his back flapped, and he forcibly rushed out of the billowing waves of air. Niet Tion retreated a few kilometers away, and looking at the girl in his arms, his face was full of horror, and he shouted, "Rushi!" Mo Rushi's body trembled, and she woke up. Her face was pale, but her breath was very stable. Seeing Niet Tion's nervous look, her eyes flickered, and crystal-clear liquid surged in her eyes, and she said softly, "Niet Tion, I'm fine." Niet Tion took a deep breath, and after sensing that Mo Rushi was fine, his face finally relaxed a lot, and he said in a deep voice, "Don't risk your life for me next time." Mo Rushi was affected by the power of Dugani's sword, and absorbed some 100 void chi, but she had the Nirvana Saint Heart in her body, so it was not a big deal. On the other hand, Niet Tion's body was covered in blood, and he looked extremely terrifying. In order to save Mo Rushi, he completely disregarded everything and didn't care about his own life or death. Originally, he still had the confidence to kill Duguin, but unfortunately, Mo Rushi's appearance made him consume a lot of star force, and the situation became even more troublesome. Mo Rushi's small face was a bit embarrassed, and she seemed to have become a hindrance to Niet Tion. "Niet Tion, do you still have the strength to fight?" At this time, Duguin stepped forward, and his aura surged like a mountain and a sea, pressing down on him. Niet Tion's injuries were not light, and coupled with his strength and realm being suppressed, he was at an absolute disadvantage. Scram! However, almost at the same time, a cold voice suddenly sounded, and then a peerless figure appeared, directly breaking through Dugani's aura. "Share!" Niet Tion's eyes trembled when he saw the figure in front of him, and he shouted, "En!" Duguin looked at the beautiful woman in front of him, and his gloomy eyes couldn't help but freeze, but then he laughed strangely and said, "Niet Tion, the women around you are really more powerful than the other. I didn't expect this girl to be a deity realm martial artist too." Duguin was very surprised. He didn't expect to actually encounter a deity realm martial artist. However, what he didn't know was that if there was no share, he couldn't advance to the deity realm at all. Chapter 1371. Cher's indifferent voice sounded from above the void. Her tone was very calm, but in the ears of Niet Tion and the others, it sounded incomparably domineering. It was as though in Cher's eyes, Duguin wasn't a worthy opponent at all. He was just an ant that she could kill at will. Mo Rushi was stunned for a moment. She looked at Cher in astonishment and didn't know what to say for a moment. At this moment, Niet Tion took a step forward and said to Cher, "Cher, step back. Leave this person to me." He knew that Cher was an early-stage low god, but he didn't know what Cher's real battle strength was. Duguin was an extremely formidable opponent. Even if Cher had the strength, she didn't have any battle experience. It was too dangerous to fight against Duguin. Mo Rushi almost died in Dugani's hands. Niet Tion didn't want the same thing to happen to Cher. "Your name is Niet Tion, right?" Cher's beautiful eyes flickered. She had a strange expression on her face and said, "Although I don't know who you are, I feel an inexplicable pain in my heart when you are injured. I think we're very good friends." Niet Tion was speechless. He didn't know what to say. Suddenly, Cher looked at Niet Tion with a faint smile and said, "Don't worry, he can't beat me." Niet Tion was stunned once again. Cher, after her bloodline awakening, was even more beautiful than before. She was so beautiful that she was out of this world. However, Nyetian was puzzled. Why is Cher so confident? I only need one sword strike to defeat him. Cher smiled again before she looked at Dugu and I and said in a cold voice, "Make your move." Dugu and I was also taken aback by Shue's words, but he finally reacted. His lips curled into a cold smile as he said sinisterly, "Little girl, you are the most arrogant person I've ever seen. Your strength is just an early-stage low god, the same as mine. I like to see how you are going to defeat me." Duguni's entire body trembled. It was obvious that he was suppressing his anger. How could he not be angry at being looked down upon by a little girl? Shuer slowly turned around. Her cold eyes locked onto Dugu and I. Her pretty face did not change at all, as if Dugu and I was nothing special in her eyes. "Arrogant little girl, you asked for it," Dugu and I sneered. With a move of his body, the demonic Void Hunter transformations was unleashed. A majestic sword chi howled like a raging river. In the void, a sword shadow pressed down on Shuer. "Shuer, watch out!" Mo Rushi screamed as her heart leapt into her throat. Nyetian creased his brows. He too was ready to act at any moment. No matter what, he wouldn't let anything happen to Cher. Shuer stood in the air, not even sparing a glance at Dugu and I. She looked completely at ease. When the gigantic sword silhouette was only 100 meters away from her, a crimson sword appeared in her hand. It was as red as fresh blood, dazzling to the eyes. "I'll defeat you with one sword strike." The corner of Cher's mouth twitched as she murmured. The long sword in her hand stabbed out gently. Her movements seemed to be a little slow, but the next moment, a strange scene took place. Endless crimson sword intent suddenly gushed out from the crimson sword. It was as if the setting sun had fallen and filled the sky. Several crimson sword shadows broke through the air like long snakes and drew a crimson trajectory in the sky. It was as if there were thousands of feet of red silk, extremely gorgeous. Chi chi chi. In the void, the crimson red silk swept out and actually entangled Duguni's sword shadows, directly crushing them. Then, the crimson sword intent spread out like a torrential torrent. Dugu and I was completely shocked by the sudden scene. His eyes trembled slightly, and his reaction was a little slow. At the moment of crisis, his eyes trembled slightly. Devil's Knight's pupil opened, and the Devil's Night vortex appeared again, about to devour the crimson red silk. However, Cher's sword intent was extremely terrifying. It actually became more and more intense. The terrible power contained in the sword intent was suddenly released. Suddenly, the sky was filled with purple and red, like the clouds of fire under the setting sun, spreading uncontrollably. Boom! The next moment, the Devil's Night vortex directly exploded. Duguni's figure trembled, and he was sent flying backward. He howled miserably, My eyes! In the endless crimson, a bloody trajectory appeared, and Dugu and I was directly knocked back thousands of meters away. His whole body was dripping with blood, and his flesh was badly mutilated. It was no longer possible to tell that he was human. On one side of his face, where his eyes were, became a huge bloody hole. One sword, just one sword. Cher not only defeated Dugu and I, but also destroyed his Devil's Knight's pupil. The sudden scene stunned everyone on the spot. The scene was dead silent, and the atmosphere was extremely strange. Nyetian looked at Cher in a daze, unable to believe his eyes. Cher's strength was so terrifying. She defeated Dugu and I with one sword, and even destroyed the latter's other pupil. This was too terrifying. Cher's words just now were not wrong. She defeated Dugu and I with one sword. Emorushi's small face was also stiff. She did not expect that the usually gentle and pleasant Cher's body actually contained such a terrifying power. Cher was indeed overbearing, but she had the capital to be overbearing. Nyetian's eyes trembled violently, and then he realized something and understood a lot. Logically speaking, Dugu and I and Cher had the same realm, but he had the 100 virtual body, which could weaken the opponent's strength, so his chances of winning should be greater. Unfortunately, Cher's Yuan meridians were different from ordinary people. They were 3 lives meridians, and each meridian had 3 transformations. It was equivalent to having 27 Yuan meridians in her body, and each of them was stronger than ordinary Yuan meridians. However, this was not the most important thing. The most terrifying thing was that Cher's 3 lives meridians were not affected by the 100 virtual body. In other words, the 3 lives meridians could ignore the suppression of the 100 virtual body. This was the key to Cher's victory over Dugu Ni. The 3 lives meridians were indeed terrifying. It could actually resist the suppression of the 100 virtual body. One must know that even Tian's supreme dragon meridians could not restrain the 100 virtual body. The 3 lives meridians were even stronger than the supreme dragon meridians. As for whether it was as strong as Tian's 10th Yuan meridian, it was unknown. At the same time, Tian also noticed that Cher's Sword Dao realm was also not affected by the 100 virtual body. It seemed that her Sword Dao realm had surpassed the profound meaning of the sword and entered a whole new realm, a higher realm. The final key to Cher's victory over Dugu Ni was that her divine spark was far stronger than Dugu Ni's. Although they were both early-stage low god, Cher's divine spark was at least several times stronger than Dugu Ni's. It was even stronger than a mid-stage or late-stage low god. What was even more terrifying was the fact that the strength that Shui was currently displaying was under the suppression of the seal left behind by Jian Qingqi. Without the suppression of the seal, it was unknown just how abnormally powerful Shui would be. Gulp. Thinking of this, Tian could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. He said in his heart, "What a terrifying Cher." At the same time, in the space of Tian's fiend god nascent embryo, Sakura could not help but frown. He muttered, "This girl's battle prowess is too terrifying. It's better not to make a move in the future. It would not be good if it attracted the attention of people with ulterior motives. After all, she is the legendary emperor of the underworld." Chapter 1372. Tian didn't know what Sakura said. Although the latter wanted to know Cher's identity very much, Sakura kept it a secret and refused to say it. Sakura didn't seem to be happy about Cher revealing her strength. Instead, he was very worried, because he knew that once Cher's identity was suspected, what awaited Tian would be a calamity that was even more dangerous than the secret of the fiend god nascent embryo being leaked. Sakura was now residing in Tian's body. Even if he didn't care about Tian's life or death, he still had to consider his own life. Although there was only a remnant soul left, Sakura still thought of being able to be reborn. This is impossible. In the void, Dugu Ni was like a madman. His whole face became distorted, incomparably hideous, and he screamed crazily. He never thought that there was such a terrible person hidden by Tian's side. He had already discovered that Cher actually ignored his 100 virtual body, which was very strange. The 100 virtual chi contained in his 100 virtual body was a very terrible power that could weaken any martial artist. Why was it useless against Cher? Moreover, Cher's swordsmanship realm was even more strange. It was actually a brand new swordsmanship realm that completely suppressed his sword intent. Who was Cher in the end? Why was she so terrible? I said, "I only need one sword to defeat you." Cher's expression didn't change. There was no ripple at all. She said faintly, as if defeating Dugu Ni was an ordinary thing for her, nothing to be proud of. Tian was stunned, watching from the side. If he knew that Cher's strength was so terrible, he didn't need to risk his life to fight with Dugu Ni. "Little girl, what's your name?" Dugu Ni's body shook, and the bloodstains on his body were swept away. His complexion improved a lot, but that eye had turned into a black hole, making him look even more ferocious. "You don't deserve to know," Cher replied indifferently. She then turned around and walked to Tian's side. She had no intention of killing Dugu Ni. "You?" Dugu Ni's face darkened, as if there were countless maggots biting his heart, making him feel suffocated. "Tian, we'll meet again." After a while, Dugu Ni calmed down and glanced at Tian. Then, his silhouette flickered as he flew up into the sky. In the sky, Dugu Ni directly broke through the void and disappeared. Nietion watched Dugu Ni leave with a complicated look in his eyes. He did not stop this person from leaving, mainly because he was worried about Mo Rushi and the others. Although Cher had defeated Dugu Ni, she had no intention of killing him. If he asked Cher to kill someone at this time, it would indeed be a bit difficult for her. Cher was originally a pure and innocent little girl. The battle with Dugu Ni should be the first battle in her life. Before, Cher did not have the slightest combat power, and she was just an ordinary girl. At this time, Cher walked over, but her face was a little pale, and she seemed to be very uncomfortable. "Cher, are you okay?" Mo Rushi saw that, and stepped forward and asked worriedly. Nietion also frowned, worried that Cher would be in trouble, but he sensed Cher's body, and everything was normal. Cher's beautiful eyes flickered, and she said with a faint smile, "I'm fine, but that person's blood is too dirty, and it makes me a little disgusted." "His blood is too dirty?" Nietion was stunned, and his face was full of black lines. What kind of evaluation did Cher have for Dugu Ni? "Nietion, your blood has too strong a murderous aura, and there is also an evil aura, but it doesn't make me feel disgusted." Cher looked at Nietion and said with a serious face, then looked at Mo Rushi and said with a smile, "Sister Rushi's blood has the purest holy aura, and it is the best blood." Nietion was speechless, and he couldn't help but frown. Could it be that Cher could really smell something from the blood? But Nietion didn't care too much. This time, he was able to drive Dugu Ni away thanks to Cher. If it wasn't for her, he really didn't know how the battle would end. Lord Nietion. At this time, Song Shanchue's figure appeared. His face was pale, and it was obvious that he was heavily injured. At this time, Song Shanchue looked suspiciously at Cher, as if he didn't know her. He clearly remembered that when he was hiding in the Divine Cold Palace to protect Mo Rushi and Cher, Cher was just an ordinary person with no Yuan Qi at all. How did she become a godly state expert in the blink of an eye, and so powerful? This was too strange. Hall mastered Song. Nietion looked at Song Shanchue, feeling very guilty. Although the matter with Elder Tian Huang was not Nietion's doing, it made Nietion feel a little guilty. "Lord Nietion, this is the misfortune of my Heaven Wasteland Palace," Song Shanchue said bitterly. He knew that whether or not Nietion was here, Dugu Ni would not let the Heaven Wasteland Palace off. But today, the losses suffered by the Heaven Wasteland Palace were too heavy. Elder Tian Huang was dead, and more than half of the swordsmen of the Heaven Wasteland Palace were dead. In the future, the Heaven Wasteland Palace would no longer be the leader of the 9 greatsword sects. Nietion let out a soft sigh and handed a divine pill to Song Shanchue, saying, "Take this pill, and your strength will recover very quickly, and you will even be able to improve further. I will let Cold Emperor and the others help you rebuild the Heaven Wasteland Palace. As for Dugu Ni, I promise you that I will kill him with my own hands." "Thank you, Lord Nietion." Song Shanchue bowed to express his gratitude. He knew that with his strength, he would never be able to take revenge on Dugu Ni in this lifetime, so he could only rely on Nietion. Nietion nodded slightly, looked at the void, and said in his heart, "Dugu Ni must have gone to the God Domain. I wonder if he will join the Crimson Moon Divine Palace?" Dugu Ni had left the Heaven Domain and would not return for the time being. Nietion remembered that he still had to return to the 3,000 small worlds with Ni jamming today, so he did not stay any longer and immediately bid farewell to Song Shanchue. The 3 of them blurred into action and flew towards the Divine Coldness Palace. "Nietion, that little girl is too strong and will easily attract attention. After reaching the domain, don't let her easily reveal her strength." On the way, Disher Tian's voice rang out, reminding Nietion. Nietion was taken aback at first, then he nodded. He was not a fool, of course. He knew that Disher Tian's warning was not as simple as it seemed. He did not let Cher make a move. It must be to prevent her identity from being seen through. I should have let Elder Hai meet Cher. Maybe he also knows Cher's true identity. Nietion did not ask Disher Tian, because he knew that the latter would not say anything. He was a little regretful that he did not let Yi Qinghai meet share. Yi Qinghai's strength should be at the supreme god level. Maybe he could see through Cher's identity. However, he was also not sure that Yi Qinghai would tell him Cher's identity. After half a day, Nietian and the others returned to the Divine Chill City. The three of them landed in the small courtyard, where Enai Jianming and the others were already waiting for them. Nietian told Cold Empress about the Heaven Desolate Palace, and asked her to send people to help Song Shanxue rebuild the Heaven Desolate Palace. Then, Nietian did not waste any more time, and prepared to return to the 3,000 small worlds with Enai Jianming. I wonder what will happen when Demon Sage, Xianlong, and Di Shi meet, Nietian thought to himself, looking at Enai Jianming with a complicated expression. Chapter 1373. 3,000 Small Worlds, Tian Luo City. Tian Luo City was no longer the third-rate city it used to be. It had become the holy land of the 3,000 small worlds. Everyone in the 3,000 small worlds knew that the former city lord of Tian Luo City, Niet Tian, had become an expert who stood at the peak of the heaven realm. In the central square of Tian Luo City, there was a huge statue of a high-spirited young man. It was Niet Tian. At this moment, the wide streets of Tian Luo City were filled with people. It was a bustling and lively scene. At this moment, two figures appeared in the void high above. The crowd below glanced at them, but didn't care because Tian Luo City was often visited by experts. However, the experts who appeared in the sky above Tian Luo City were different from the past. They were two young men. Although they had restrained their aura, it was still difficult to conceal the powerful aura around them. These two people were none other than Niet Tian and Enai Jianming. Niet Tian stood in the sky and looked at the huge statue in the city from afar. He suddenly realized that the statue looked very similar to him. He couldn't help but be stunned. Then he understood and couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that he had become an existence like the 3,000 small worlds. Looking at Tian Luo City below him, Niet Tian suddenly thought of everything in the past. The young man who brought Nieyuro and the others to Tian Luo City for the first time. He held the Dragon Blood Martial Gathering under great pressure and finally stepped into Sumi's spiritual capital with his own strength. Thinking of all this, Niet Tian was slightly moved. Although these things only happened a few years ago, it made him feel as if it was a lifetime ago. Enai Jianming looked at Niet Tian and was not in a hurry. Let's go out of the city. After a while, Niet Tian became cold and said with a faint smile. The two figures moved and arrived in the sky above Tian Luo Mountain in the blink of an eye. Just when the two figures appeared, Tian Luo Mountain suddenly trembled. Then, a majestic dragon aura was released and gradually condensed into a dragon-shaped shadow. It was the dragon soul Di Shi. Niet Tian. Di Shi's figure moved and soared into the sky. A loud dragon roar resounded in the space. Big brother Di Shi. Niet Tian was also very excited. He stepped in the air and stepped on Di Shi's back. Di Shi's enormous dragon silhouette soared into the sky, sweeping up the scattered clouds in all directions with a majestic aura. He said loudly, Niet Tian, your strength has actually reached the peak of Sky Emperor. It seems like you've experienced a lot during this period of time. It had only been a few years since Niet Tian left Heaven Luo City. To Di Shi, such a short period of time was like the blink of an eye. Niet Tian's strength had risen so quickly that Di Shi was very surprised. Niet Tian smiled faintly and said, Brother Di Shi, your dragon chi has also recovered a little. It's useless even if the dragon energy recovers. Di Shi's voice was mighty as he said, If I can't recover my physical body, I will only be a dragon soul in the end. I will never be able to return to my peak. Big brother Di Shi, I brought someone who can restore your dragon body. Niet Tian smiled and said directly, However, at this moment, Di Shi was surprised. Then he noticed the existence of Enai Jianming. His dragon eyes that were like the sun and the moon suddenly darkened. And then he roared into the sky. Dragon Rebel Chi, this guy is from the Dragon Rebel clan. In an instant, Dishi realized that Ni jamming was from the Dragon Rebel clan. He suddenly became furious and roared into the sky. His enormous body directly rushed towards Ni jamming. Brother Dishi, wait. Tian knew that Dishi was hot-tempered, so he screamed and wanted to stop him. Mr. Tian, let him do it. Ni jamming's face was solemn. He stood quietly in the sky and did not intend to resist. Boom! Dishi's enormous figure rushed over, and a loud sound was heard in the sky. However, it did not cause any damage to Ni jamming. Dishi was just a dragon soul, not a physical body, while Ni jamming was already a god-state warrior. The gap between the two was too big. Even if Ni jamming stood still, Dishi could not hurt him. However, Dishi did not give up and continued to charge forward. In the void, the raging dragon Chi kept raging, as if it was going to fall and tear the void apart. And yet Tian looked helpless and could only look at Dishi to vent his anger. However, at this time, he immediately found that as Dishi kept attacking, his strength was getting stronger and stronger. Even the dragon shadow was getting closer to the real thing. Noticing this, Tian could not help but stare, and a strange look appeared on his face. He immediately activated the holographic divine sigil. The invisible divine sigil shrouded over, and a holographic projection appeared in his mind. This, Tian looked at the holographic projection and immediately understood what was going on. He could not help but be stunned. Ni jamming's body slowly released the dragon Chi, and it automatically transformed into Dishi's dragon Chi. While Dishi's strength was increasing, Ni jamming's strength was gradually weakening. Could this be the method that Ni jamming used to restore Brother Dishi's physical body? Tian murmured with a shocked look. He did not know what method Ni jamming had used to transform the dragon Chi into dragon Chi. However, Ni jamming had obviously sacrificed his strength to restore Dishi's strength. At this time, people in Tianluo City and the nearby cities were watching the scene in the sky. They stared blankly, and their eyes became dull. After a while, Dishi's strength had reached the peak of Celestial Emperor, while Ni jamming's strength had dropped from the peak of Intermediate Deity to the late stage of Intermediate Deity. Bastard, why didn't you fight back? Dishi roared. He seemed to be a little tired. His huge body floated in the air, and then he found the change in his strength. He could not help but be stunned. He shouted, "Boy from the Dragon Rebel clan, do you think that I will forgive you if you restore my strength?" The Dragon Rebel clan is the mortal enemy of the Dragon clan. Even if you die in front of me, I will still crush your bones and scatter your ashes. Dishi's hatred for the Dragon Rebel clan was higher than the sky and deeper than the sea. Even if Ni jamming stood still and let him hit him, and even sacrificed his strength to restore his strength, his hatred still could not be reduced. Brother Dishi, Tian moved and came to Dishi. He said, "He is indeed a member of the Dragon Rebel clan, but he has a way to restore your physical body. I don't need it." Dishi roared angrily. The Dragon Rebel clan is the mortal enemy of the Dragon clan. Even if I want to restore my physical body, I don't need the help of the Dragon Rebel clan. In Dishi's mind, the Dragon clan was the most elegant and noble race in the world. It was a great humiliation for him to let his enemy restore his physical body. Yet Tian frowned slightly. He did not expect Dishi to be so stubborn in addition to his hot temper. Ni jamming stood where he was with a calm face. He had expected this situation, so he was not surprised by Dishi's reaction. "Lord Dishi, I know that no matter what I do, I can't eliminate your hatred. I also know that you will not let me restore your physical body." Suddenly, Ni jamming looked up at Dishi and said with burning eyes, "You can ignore your physical body, but can you ignore the dragon spring vein?" Chapter 1374. In the sky above Tianluo City, Dishi suddenly heard Ni jamming mention the dragon spring vein. After being stunned for a moment, he calmed down and said in a deep voice, "Brat, how do you know about the dragon spring vein?" The dragon spring meridian was a sacred treasure of the dragon kind. Dishi didn't care whether his physical body could recover or not. but he had to find the Dragon Spring Meridian. I have a way to help you find the Dragon Spring Vein. And jamming did not say too much. Dishi's pupils constricted slightly. He asked in surprise, "Why should I believe you?" And jamming's expression was calm. He looked at Nietian and said, "You don't need to believe me. You only need to believe him." Nietian narrowed his eyes slightly, as he did not expect jamming to say that. It seemed that after jamming regained his memories, he was no longer as naive as before and knew how to play tricks. At this time, Dishi looked at Nietian, obviously asking the latter if jamming was a trustworthy person. Yes. After thinking for a while, Nietian nodded solemnly. For now, jamming was a trustworthy person. Dishi calmed down, pondered for a long while, then looked at jamming and asked, "Can you really find the Dragon Spring Vein?" Xianlong Demon Saint. You should have heard of this name, right? jamming's eyes lit up, and he suddenly said, "The Sacred Lord of the Dragon Rebel Clan." Dishi moved slightly and was a little surprised. Then he realized something and exclaimed, "You're Demon Saint Xianlong." That's right. Jamming did not deny it, and said calmly, "You should believe me now." She was a little shocked. He didn't expect the young man in front of him to be Demon Saint Xianlong, the demon who destroyed the Dragon Clan. It was no wonder that she sensed an unusually powerful dragon chi from jamming. "All right, this dragon believes you." After a moment, she finally nodded his head, but his eyes were still filled with anger. Jamming nodded slightly and said, "Then let's leave this place." Dishi narrowed his eyes and said, "I'm just a dragon soul. I can't leave Tunluo Mountain." Jamming laughed and said, "I couldn't in the past, but I can now. I'll let you recover your strength to peak Heavenly Emperor in order to leave this place." Nietian frowned and suddenly came to a realization. It turned out that jamming had sacrificed his strength to bring Dishi away, not to help him recover his physical body. It seemed like jamming had already planned everything. Nietian and the other two did not waste any more time and immediately prepared to leave Tianluo City. Before leaving this place, Nietian found the current Tianluo City Lord, Gao Han, who was also the former Tianluo City Guard commander, and left him some spirit pills and martial arts manuals. After leaving Heaven Luo City this time, he didn't know if he would ever return. Then, under the watchful eyes of countless people, the three of them tore through the void and left. It was only at this moment that the people of Heaven Luo City realized that the young city lord of the past had grown into an existence that they could not understand. Half a day later, Nietian's group arrived at the Shumi world, the entrance to the forbidden land of wind and cloud. You want to restore Big Brother Dishi's body in the forbidden land of wind. Nietian stared at the forbidden land of wind and couldn't help but be stunned. Back then, he had entered the forbidden land of wind and cloud. That was how he had met jamming and his brother and learned about the existence of the Dragon Rebel Clan and the secret behind the destruction of the Dragon Clan. Yes. Jamming nodded and said, "Lord Dishi is the most powerful golden dragon in the Dragon Clan. It won't be easy to restore his body. It will take some time." The corners of Nietian's mouth twitched slightly. It seemed that he had underestimated the situation. Then, the three of them entered the forbidden land of wind and went directly to the Dragon Rebel Valley. Is this the Dragon Rebel ancestral ground? Dishi looked at the valley in front of him, his eyes trembling slightly. The Divine Dragon Clan had been completely destroyed, but the enemies of the Divine Dragon Clan were hiding in the Dragon Rebel ancestral ground, lingering on. This made him even angrier. Yes. Jamming nodded and said to Dishi, "Lord Dishi, please wait here. Sacred Lord is back." At this moment, all the people of the Dragon Rebel Clan showed up and greeted jamming. When the people of the Dragon Rebel Clan saw Dishi, they were all shocked and looked up at him. More than 600,000 years had passed. The people of the Dragon Rebel Clan were no different from ordinary human beings now. Only the chieftain and the elders knew about the past of the Dragon Rebel Clan. Most of the people of the Dragon Rebel clan had never seen the Dragon clan before. They were all prostrating on the ground in worship. Dishi moved and soared into the sky. He didn't want to see the people of the Dragon Rebel clan. Nietian and Ni Jiaming looked at each other and smiled. Then they walked into the Dragon Rebel hall. After a while, the chieftain of the Dragon Rebel clan, Ni Nan, the chief elder, Ni Chifeng, and the other elders all showed up. Sacred Lord, although Ni Nan was Ni Jiaming's father, he was very respectful to the latter. When Ni Chifeng and the others saw Nietian, their expressions became complicated. They already knew that Nietian wasn't the destined one in the heavenly secret prophecy. However, Nietian was related to both the Dragon Clan and the Dragon Rebel clan. He must have come to the Dragon Rebel Valley for something. Lord Nietian, long time no see. Ni Chifeng took a step forward and said calmly. He was shocked. He sensed that Nietian's strength had reached the peak of the Heaven Emperor realm. However, the next moment, Ni Chifeng was even more shocked. He suddenly realized that Ni Jiaming's strength had advanced to the God realm. Sacred Lord, Ni Chifeng was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Yes, Ni Jiaming nodded and said, some of my memories have been awakened. Immediately, Ni Jiaming briefly explained everything that had happened. Ni Chifeng and the others were dumbfounded. However, Ni Jiaming's memories had been awakened, his strength had been restored, and the vanishing shadow restriction in his body had been suppressed. This was absolutely great news for the Dragon Rebel clan. Sacred Lord, there's a dragon soul outside. He's here. Ni Chifeng calmed down a lot and said seriously, Chief Elder, since my memories have been awakened, there are some things I have to do. Ni Jiaming let out a long sigh and told them about Dishi. In the end, he said, I will help Lord Dishi recover his dragon body and then look for the Guardian family with him. The Guardian clan. When Ni Chifeng and the others heard Ni Jiaming mention this organization, they were stunned on the spot. The Guardian family, Ni Chifeng and the others all knew about this organization, but they had only read about it in ancient books. They had never seen it in person. Therefore, they even doubted whether this organization really existed. Now that Ni Jiaming mentioned the Guardian family, it proved that this secret organization did exist. Holy Lord, you want to help Lord Dishi recover his dragon body. Could it be that you want to use? At this moment, Ni Chifeng suddenly thought of something, and his expression changed. He took a step forward, but didn't dare to finish his sentence. The other elders also thought of something, and their expressions changed at the same time. Seeing the reaction of Ni Chifeng and the others, Nietian couldn't help but frown. He didn't know how Ni Jiaming was going to help Dishi recover his dragon body. He actually made Ni Chifeng and the others so frightened. Chapter 1375. Qilin's Precious Blood. Up in the Dragon Rebel Hall, Nietian was stunned when he heard the name. He finally understood why Ni Chifeng and the others were so frightened. It turned out that Ni Jiaming was going to use Qilin's Precious Blood to restore Dishi's dragon body. Qilin's Precious Blood was the Dragon Rebel clan's sacred treasure. Normally, Qilin's Precious Blood would only be used by the most outstanding members of the Dragon Rebel clan. Outsiders couldn't use it. When Nietian and the others had been badly injured, Ni Jiaming had insisted on using Qilin's Precious Blood. Now, Ni Jiaming was going to use Qilin's Precious Blood on the Dragon Rebel clan's mortal enemy. How could Ni Chifeng and the others accept it? However, Nietian wasn't right. Ni Chifeng was so frightened not only because of Ni Jiaming's decision, but also because once Dishi used Qilin's Precious Blood, it would probably be destroyed. Even if it could be preserved, it would take a long time to recover. The vitality of Qilin's Precious Blood contained rich dragon qi, while Dishi's body contained the purest dragon qi. The clash of the two extreme powers would cause great harm to Qilin's Precious Blood. Back then, Nietian had a bit of dragon qi in his body, but he had almost died together with Qilin's Precious Blood. Sacred Lord, this. Ni Chifeng and the others came to themselves in shock. They wanted to say something, but Ni Jiaming interrupted them. I've made up my mind. Ni Jiaming said calmly, this is a chance for the Dragon Rebel clan to atone for the mistakes we've made in the past. It's also a chance for us to rise again. If the Dragon Rebel clan can be revived, we can work with them to destroy the Jueying Temple. Only then can the Jueying inhibition in the Dragon Rebel clan be completely removed. Ni Chifeng and the others were stunned. They all knew that Ni Jiaming wasn't that gentle young man anymore. He had become the real sacred lord Xian Long Ni Nan, Ni Chifeng, and the others knew that nothing they said would change anything. They could only nod and support Ni Jiaming's decision. Sacred Lord, when are you going to take Lord Di Shi into the Dragon Rebel forbidden ground? Ni Chifeng heaved a long sigh. He seemed to have aged a lot. Everyone understood that if Ni Jiaming helped Di Shi recover his dragon body and Di Shi's strength recovered, it would be the end for the Dragon Rebel clan if he suddenly went crazy. Right away, Ni Jiaming nodded slightly, then looked at Nietian and said, "But before that, I have something to say to Mr. Nietian." Ni Chifeng and the others nodded respectfully and left the hall, leaving only Nietian and Ni Jiaming. Ni Jiaming, if you have anything to say, just say it. Nietian looked at Ni Jiaming, not knowing what the latter would say. Mr. Nietian, it will take some time to restore Lord Di Shi's physical body, at least half a year, at most a year. I don't think you have time to stay in the Dragon Rebel Valley, right? Ni Jiaming said calmly as he sized up Nietian with a strange gaze. The heart of nothingness in your body can't be suppressed any longer. You don't have much time left. Right now, even if your God Fiend essence embryo awakens, you won't be able to use the heart of nothingness. Only by fusing with the boundaries of the universe can you survive. The faint voice fell into Nietian's ears, but made him frown. It turned out that Ni Jiaming had already seen through everything. Not only did he know about the danger of the heart of nothingness, but he also knew about the God Fiend essence embryo. In fact, it wasn't strange at all. Ni Jiaming was a man who had lived for more than 600,000 years. Even the old monsters in those territories didn't have such a lifespan. What do you want to say? Nietian looked at Ni Jiaming, his eyes flickering slightly. Ni Jiaming was no longer as simple as he used to be. Instead, he had become very complicated. He obviously didn't want to show off to Nietian by saying so much to him. He had another purpose. Mr. Nietian, when I traveled between territories in my early years, I heard about the boundaries of the universe. Ni Jiaming smiled, a strange look flashing in his eyes. Really? Nietian was stunned. He was worried about where the boundaries of the universe were. Yes. Ni Jiaming nodded slightly. All of a sudden, he took out a token and gave it to Nietian. He said, "This is the Dragon Rebel sacred token. Take it. Go to the territories and find a man called Ming Mo. He's the Dragon Emperor of the demonic Dragon Clan. I didn't kill him back then, so he should still be alive. If he sees the Dragon Rebel sacred token, he'll tell you where the boundaries of the universe are." Ming Mo. Nietian took the Dragon Rebel sacred token, but he frowned slightly. The territories were so vast. Where could he find such a man? He knew nothing about territories. Finding a man in such a vast territory was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Besides, since Ming Mo knew Ni Jiaming, he must have been a man from more than 600,000 years ago. He didn't even know if he was still alive. But this was a clue. It was better than nothing. "That's all I can do for you." Ni Jiaming smiled and said, "Whether you can find Ming Mo or not depends on your luck." "Yes." Nietian nodded slightly and said with a smile, "Is there anything else you want to tell me?" Ni Jiaming frowned. He thought for a while, but his face looked serious. He said, "There's something you might want to know, but it doesn't have much to do with you." "What is it?" Nietian was taken aback. "It's about the heavenly secret prophecy." Ni Jiaming narrowed his eyes and said, "The destined one in the heavenly secret prophecy isn't a person, but an organization." "An organization?" Nietian's pupils shrank slightly. He was dumbfounded. He thought the destined one was Lin Yi. Once Lin Yi died, the heavenly secret prophecy would be broken. He didn't expect there to be more than one destined one, but an organization. Are there other people with natural dragon bloodlines besides Lin Yi? Nietion asked in a deep voice after calming down a little. Yes. Enai Jiaming smiled bitterly and said, according to the heavenly secret prophecy, this is the fate of the Dragon Rebel clan. The reincarnated Blood Demon King is just the beginning. There will be more destined ones in the future. Before these destined ones show up, I must find a guardian family. Perhaps this is also my destiny. Nietion frowned, and his eyes were a little gloomy. He had never believed in fate, so he had always scoffed at what others said about fate. Fate was the foundation of human survival. It could only be controlled by oneself. How could one believe in fate? Enai Jiaming had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, but he didn't even know this. He had lived in vain. Perhaps it was because he had lived for so long and experienced so much that Enai Jiaming believed in fate more. Mr. Nieton, after I help Lord D, she restore his dragon body, I will go to find a guardian family with him. Enai Jiaming stopped talking about the destined one and turned to Nietion. Okay. Nietion nodded slightly. He found that Enai Jiaming seemed to want to say something, but stopped on second thought. He couldn't help but ask, is there anything else you want to tell me? Enai Jiaming frowned and looked serious. After thinking for a long time, he finally said, about the girl named Cher, I have something to remind you. Cher. Nietion was stunned. Then his eyes trembled, and he said excitedly, you know the real identity of Cher? Chapter 1376. Do you really know Cher's identity? Above the Dragon Rebel Palace, Nietion stared at Enai Jiaming with burning eyes, with uncontrollable passion. He really wanted to know Cher's identity, but Elder Jian and Indra kept it a secret, which made him even more curious. Enai Jiaming lived longer than Elder Jian and Indra, so it was not strange that he knew Cher's identity. I do know Miss Cher's identity. Enai Jiaming nodded slightly, but his expression was very serious. He said, but I can't say too much about her. If you really want to know, I'll tell you a name. You'll find the answer you want to know by following this name. A name? Nietion's eyes narrowed slightly, and he couldn't hide the disappointment on his face. But a name was not bad, and it was better than Elder Jian and Indra not saying anything. Emperor of the Underworld. Enai Jiaming's eyes flickered, and he squeezed the two words out of his teeth. He said, if you have the chance to enter the territory, you can look for clues about Emperor of the Underworld yourself. But this name should be taboo, so don't mention it to others. Okay. Nietion nodded slightly. It was better to know some clues than nothing. He still couldn't figure out what was behind Cher, that even Enai Jiaming was so cautious. All of a sudden, Enai Jiaming asked, Mr. Nietion, is there a strange serpent with dragon horns beside Miss Shue? Nietion's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said in surprise, how do you know? When Cher was in the abyss of chaos, there was indeed a big snake by her side, named Shy. Then there's no mistake. Enai Jiaming nodded heavily, and his eyes narrowed. He said, that big snake is the divine beast that accompanied Miss Cher, and it concerns Miss Cher's life and death. Before the big snake grows up, it can't leave its birthplace. Nietion was stunned again. He didn't expect Enai Jiaming to know so much. No wonder when he brought Cher out of the Forest of Destiny, Shyness was unwilling to leave. So it was because it couldn't leave. That's all I can say about Miss Cher. Enai Jiaming looked at Nietion with a solemn expression, but said in his heart, the divine beast beside Cher is not a serpent at all, but the legendary ancestral dragon. Nietion did not know what Enai Jiaming was thinking and could only nod slightly. Mr. Nietion, Miss Cher's identity is special. She is related to the survival of a realm. Enai Jiaming's expression softened. Once we enter the realm verse, don't let her see any paramount gods, and don't let her see an astrologer. Don't let her show her strength in front of others. If her identity is leaked, it will definitely be a disaster for you. All right, I got it. Nietion nodded solemnly with a solemn expression. Enai Jiaming's words were exactly the same as Di Tion's. Both of them had the same evaluation of Cher. It seemed that Cher's identity must be extraordinary. But Nietion couldn't figure out. She was just a little girl. No matter how powerful she was, how could she be related to the survival of a realm? Was Ni jamming making a fuss over nothing? But he would take Ni jamming's warning to heart and would not let Cher fight casually again. With Cher's age and strength, if she fought, she would attract too much attention. All right, that's all I want to say. I'm going to take Lord D, she, into the Dragon Rebel forbidden area. You go and tell him. Ni jamming smiled faintly and said to Nietion. Nietion nodded and said yes. He leaped out of the Dragon Rebel palace and went to the sky. Nietion, what did Demon Saint Xianlong say to you? Dishi appeared and asked in a deep voice. Nietion didn't hide anything. He told Dishi what Ni jamming said, and said in the end, Brother Dishi, Ni jamming will need about half a year to a year to help you recover your body. After that, he will go with you to find the Dragon Spring Vein. During this time, I can't stay here with you. I have a lot of things to deal with. Don't worry. Dishi's huge dragon head shook. He knew what Nietion was worried about. He said, after I recover my body, I won't fight against the Dragon Rebel tribe. If Demon Saint Xianlong can help me find the Dragon Spring Vein and revive the Dragon tribe, I'll reconsider everything. Okay. Nietion nodded heavily, then laughed and said, Brother Dishi, let's part ways here. When I'm done with my business, I'll come here to find you. I hope you're still here then. Okay. She shook his head and looked at Nietion with burning eyes. The two had just met for half a day, and then they had to part again. After this, they didn't know when they would meet again. Nietion smiled faintly and didn't stay any longer. He moved and left. After watching Nietion leave, she slowly turned his huge body around. Ni jamming had appeared behind him at some point. Lord Dishi, please. Ni jamming smiled and nodded. Dishi didn't say anything. He followed Ni jamming to the Dragon Rebel Forbidden Land. A long time after the two of them left, Nietion's figure appeared again. It turned out that Nietion was still worried about Ni jamming, so he planned to leave after a few days. Then, Nietion hid in the Dragon Rebel Valley for 2 days. After confirming that there was nothing unusual, he finally left. He could only leave the Dragon Spring Vein to Ni jamming and Shi for the time being. He hoped they could cooperate well. After leaving the Wind Cloud Forbidden Land, Nietion returned to the Divine Realm. Half a day later, he appeared in the Divine Cold Palace. Nietion went to a small courtyard. Rushi and Cher happened to be there. Nietion. Rushi was very happy to see Nietion back. Cher also smiled faintly. Clearly, she was much friendlier to Nietion. Nietion smiled faintly and told them what happened in the past few days. Then, he prepared to go to the Divine Realm. Lord. At this time, Nietzsche appeared. He was very happy to see Nietion and said, Lord Mo Qianjun and Master Zhu Qiansheng are here. They're in the Divine Cold Palace now. Okay. Nietion nodded. He told Rushi and went to the Divine Cold Palace. Before he went to the 3,000 Small Worlds, he asked Nietzsche to find Mo Qianjun and Zhu Qiansheng. He was going to go with them. A day later, Nietion and the others appeared in the square outside the Divine Cold Palace. Today, they would leave the Divine Realm and go to the Divine Realm. A total of 5 people were going with Nietion. Rushi, Cher, Nietzsche, Mo Qianjun, and Zhu Qiansheng. As for the others, Han Fei, Zhang Jianqing, and the others, Nietion left several space-time array scrolls. When their strength increased, they would go to the Divine Realm on their own. On the square, Nietion opened the space-time array scroll. A powerful space-time aura was released, and a space-time array was formed. Nietion did not hesitate and was the first to step into the array. Rushi and the others followed suit. With a thought, Nietion activated the space-time array. A surge of space-time aura appeared in the array. Chapter 1377. Shocking God Domain, Scarlet Moonland, in a valley. Boom! Suddenly, the void shook and a space-time aura appeared. Several figures descended from the sky. It was Nietion and the others. Nietion took a step forward and exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. His pale complexion immediately improved. The space-time pressure in crossing territories was very strong. Even with Nietion's strength, he still felt a little tired. Everyone reacted immediately and started to observe the surrounding environment. Everything here was not much different from a plane world. The space-time was very stable, and the heaven and earth spiritual power was more abundant. Among the heaven and earth spiritual power, there was a mysterious power, the spirit force. The trees here were taller than in the heaven domain. Even the short shrubs were dozens of meters high. In such an environment, the warriors looked even smaller. Is this the upper territory? Zhou Qiansheng was the first to speak. He seemed very excited as he looked around. The upper territory, the god domain, these were the things that the warriors in the heaven domain dreamed of. Zhou Qiansheng was very excited now that he was in the territory. Yet Tian nodded slightly. With a flip of his hand, a map scroll appeared in his palm, and he unfurled it. This was the map he found in Zhao Zi's spatial ring. It was the map of the entire shocking god domain. The map scroll was opened, and several streams of light surged into it. As the light flickered, the characters gradually became clear. And yet Tian sensed the aura on the map and immediately understood. He pointed at a mountain range and said, "We are in the Brilliant Sky mountain range. This is the territory of the Red Moon Divine Palace." The information on the map was very clear. The entire shocking god domain was divided into 13 regions. 12 of them were the divine palaces. The core region in the center was not shown. There was no information about it. Yet Tian glanced at the unknown region and did not pay much attention to it. Red Moon Divine Palace. With a thought, a spot of light lit up on the map. It was the location of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. What a magical map! Nietcho looked at the changes on the map and could not help but exclaim. Sure enough, the things created by the people of the realms were much more brilliant than those of the Heaven Realm's God Realm. Nie Tian nodded with a smile and said, "The Brilliant Sky mountain range we are currently at is located at the intersection of many divine palaces. It is 3,000 miles away from the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. Judging from the stability of the realm's space-time, it would take at least a few days to reach the Crimson Moon Divine Palace." The space-time pressure in realms was heavier, and the space-time stability was also higher. Therefore, the speed of martial practitioners would be affected here. If it was in the Heaven Realm's divine domain, Niet Tian could fly 3,000 miles in a day. On the other hand, it would take him about 3 days to travel 3,000 kilometers in the realms. Niet Tian, are you going to the Crimson Moon Divine Palace now? At this time, Mo Qianjun, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. Shui Wushuang and Qian Lusha are both at the Red Moon Divine Palace. If you go there now, they won't let you go. Brother Mo, don't worry. I heard from Lord Zhao that the shocking God Realm will hold the grand competition of the 12 divine palaces in 3 months. This is a matter of life and death for the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. Even if Shui Wushuang wants to kill me, it will be after the competition. Yet Tian smiled faintly. He was not worried about Shui Wushuang's revenge. The reason why Niet Tian was in a hurry to go to the Crimson Moon Divine Palace was because he wanted to see the Red Moon Empress and inquire about the glorious demon or the cosmos boundary. The heart of nothingness was almost out of control. Niet Tian had to find the cosmos boundary as soon as possible. This was the most important matter at the moment. Brother Mo, Brother Gio, both of you come with me to the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. With your talent, you should be able to condense your godhead and advance to the God Realm very quickly. Niet Tian said with a faint smile. He could sense that Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qianxing's strength had also improved greatly. Obviously, they had absorbed some spirit sword intent when Cher awakened. All right, Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qianxing nodded in agreement. They knew nothing about the realm verse. Entering the Crimson Moon Divine Palace with Niet Tian was the best choice. After the discussion, they did not delay any further and prepared to go to the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. At this time, Niet Tian suddenly sensed something. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he shouted, "Be careful! Rumble! Rumble! Rumble!" Before he could finish his sentence, a violent sound came from the ground. The ground was directly lifted up, and more than a dozen huge black figures broke out of the ground. They opened their crimson eyes and stared at Niet Tian and the others. What is this? Jiao Qiansheng sensed the violent aura and couldn't help but scream. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he gestured for everyone to stick together. What appeared around them was a very strange monster. Its body was not too big, only about 100 meters or so. Its entire body was round and black, like a giant silkworm chrysalis, giving people a very uncomfortable feeling. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he said, "Everyone, be careful. These strange creatures, although their bodies were not big, their aura was very strong. It was even more terrifying than the Earth Monitor lizard that Nye Tian had seen before. Goo goo." At this time, the monster let out a strange cry and rushed over like a small hill. Nye Tian frowned and stabbed out with his sword. The huge sword shadow directly bombarded the monster's body, but it only slightly slowed it down. He was forced to retreat again, and the long sword in his hand almost fell out. So strong, Nye Tian stabilized his body, and his face couldn't help but sink. This monster did not look good, but its strength was very strong. Its defense was also very frightening. It took a direct hit from Nye Tian and was not injured at all. In the next moment, the other cocoons also attacked. There was a huge bloody hole on its head, and it looked very bloody. Nye Qiao and the rest took action and blocked the attacks of the cocoons. Out of everyone present, Cher was undoubtedly the strongest, followed by Nye Tian and Nye Qiao. But Nye Tian did not let Cher take action, but let her and Mo Rushi stand in the center of the group. "Nye Tian, what the hell is this? It's so powerful." Jiao Qiansheng cried out. It was obvious that he could not hold on any longer. "Let's leave." Nye Tian swept out with his sword, and countless sword shadows appeared, forcing the cocoons to retreat a few steps. He then stepped on the ground and flew into the sky. The rest immediately reacted and soared into the sky. The cocoons came out from the ground and obviously could not fly. Nye Tian and the rest could not defeat them, but it was not a problem for them to escape. But right at that moment, an ear-piercing sound came out from the void. Nye Tian raised his head to look and saw that the sky was actually filled with sharp arrows. It was a black mass that covered the sky and covered the earth as they flew over. Shit! The sudden scene caused Nye Tian's gaze to darken, and his face changed. The sharp arrows in the sky were extremely powerful, like rainbows piercing through the sun. They could pierce through the clouds and split rocks. Chapter 1378. The arrows in the sky pressed down like dark clouds, and Nye Tian had no choice but to use the Supreme Dragon Vein, hoping to block the arrows. "Let me help you." Mo Qianjun was extremely calm. He bellowed and immediately released the Great Sky Sword Seal, releasing it and enveloping the gigantic dragon. Bang, bang, bang. In the next moment, the sky full of arrows rained down and struck the gigantic dragon, releasing a loud sound. Nye Tian felt that his body was continuously being attacked, causing all the meridians in his body to tremble. Below, the silkworms that were struck by the arrows were actually unable to withstand the power of the arrows, and instantly became porcupines, releasing ear-piercing screams. At the same time, Nye Tian and Mo Qianjun were finally unable to withstand it, and spat out a mouthful of blood. The Great Sky Sword Seal and the Scarlet Gold Gigantic Dragon crumbled at the same time. In the moment of imminent peril, Nye Qiao's figure instantly rushed out, his body transforming into a regiment of flames. The berserk blazing power actually incinerated all the arrows in the sky. The corners of Nye Tian's mouth curled up into a smile when he saw this. Nye Qiao's body contained the surging starry sky sacred flame. Although the arrows were powerful, they were unable to withstand the burning of the starry sky sacred flame. The silkworms on the ground also obtained a chance to breathe, and all drilled into the ground. Only 2 or 3 of them were heavily injured and were lying on the ground. After a moment, the rain of arrows finally disappeared, and Nye Tian heaved a sigh of relief. His expression became much more relaxed. At least it was a daunting experience. But just at that moment, a dozen figures suddenly appeared in the sky, angrily rushing towards Nye Tian and the rest. "Asshole! The leader was a middle-aged man. He was obviously extremely angry. He looked at Niet Tian coldly and bellowed, "Do you know, you have ruined my plans." Huh? Niet Tian's gaze froze. He immediately reacted. The people in front of him were the ones who shot the arrows at them. These people almost took the lives of Niet Tian and the rest, but before they could say anything, the other party started to shout and shout, causing Niet Tian to be extremely unhappy. "You're the bastard." Zhou Qiansheng had a fiery temper. He scolded them right away. "You almost killed us. It's fine if you don't apologize, but you actually dare to shout and scream. Do you really think I'm a pushover?" These people obviously didn't want to kill Niet Tian's group. They just wanted to hunt the silkworms. Unfortunately, Niet Tian's group was standing together with the silkworms. "You," the middle-aged man trembled in anger. "Do you know that we've waited for 3 months to hunt the earth silkworm? You saved the earth silkworm as soon as you arrived. Aren't you be asterisk stards? Earth silkworms, so those monsters were earth silkworms." Niet Tian looked at the middle-aged man. Judging from his aura, this man should be an early-stage low god, even weaker than 1,000 flowing kills. However, the young man beside him had a very steady aura. His strength was definitely above the middle-aged man's. Niet Tian was also depressed. To encounter such a thing as soon as he arrived in the terra firma, he was really unlucky. In this matter, neither side was in the wrong. It could only be said that Niet Tian's group had chosen the wrong place to land. But the other party was really ruthless. They didn't care about their lives and immediately shot arrows. If Niet Xiao hadn't released the starry sacred flame, Niet Tian's group would definitely have been injured. Uncle Ding, forget it. At this time, the young man took a step forward and frowned. In the end, he still cupped his hands towards Niet Tian's group and said, "Everyone, I'm really sorry for what happened just now. Fortunately, you didn't suffer any serious injuries. Here are a few low-grade divine pellets. Please accept them." After saying that, the man handed over a few divine pellets to Niet Tian. His attitude could be considered as sincere. Niet Tian took the divine pellets and smiled helplessly. "Young master, we can't let this matter go. Without the silkworm's crystal, eldest lady's life will be in danger." The middle-aged man frowned and said, "We must make them compensate us for our losses." "Uncle Ding, I said forget it." The young man suddenly looked at the middle-aged man, and his eyes darkened. He seemed to be a little angry. "Sigh." The middle-aged man sighed and finally lowered his head in silence. Niet Tian's eyes narrowed. He felt that this young man was not bad. He took a step forward and said, "I am Niet Tian, a cultivator from the lower plains. I just arrived at the shocking god domain. May I know how to address you?" When the young man heard Niet Tian's words, his eyes flickered. He was obviously very surprised. He then said, "I am Wang Feline from the Brilliant Sky City. Are you really from the lower plains?" Wang Feline had a face of doubt. He never thought that Niet Tian's group was actually from the lower plains. The strength of the lower plains was actually so terrifying. They could actually block the armor-piercing arrow. It was really surprising. It should be known that the power of the armor-piercing arrow was something that even the yellow-ranked divine beast, the silkworm, could not resist. Wang Feline sensed the strength of Niet Tian's group. The doubt in his eyes deepened. He even began to doubt Niet Tian's words. Although he did not know much about the lower plains, he had heard that the cultivators of the lower plains could at most reach the peak of the heavenly emperor realm. But Cher and Niet Xiao, who were beside Niet Tian, clearly had the strength of a lower god. How is this possible? "Brother Wang, we indeed came from the lower plains." Niet Tian knew what Wang Feline was suspecting. He smiled faintly and said, "My two friends had some fortuitous encounters, so they condensed divine sparks." "I see." Wang Feline nodded slightly. However, Wang Feline was clearly not interested in chatting with Niet Tian. He turned his eyes to the ground and said to the middle-aged man beside him, "Uncle Ding, deal with the 3 silkworms on the ground first." "Yes." Ding Yuan agreed. He landed on the ground with the people beside him and began to deal with the silkworms. Niet Tian saw Ding Yuan cut open the silkworm's body and took out a fist-sized crystalline object. He could not help but be stunned. He looked at Wang Feline and said, "Brother Wang, May I ask what the silkworm crystal is used for? He had just heard Ding Yuan mention the silkworm crystal, so he guessed that the object they took out was the silkworm crystal. Although it was thousands of meters away from the ground, Niet Tian could still sense that the silkworm crystal contained an extremely violent and terrifying energy. Wang Fuling glanced at Niet Tian. Although he was a little impatient, he still said, "The silkworm is a yellow-ranked divine beast. It lives thousands of meters below the ground. It absorbs the essence of the Mother Earth all year round and forms a silkworm crystal in its body. It is a kind of thing with an extremely strong life force." Yellow-ranked divine beast, Mother Earth, silkworm crystal. Niet Tian listened to Wang Fuling's words and carefully identified the key words. He guessed that the divine beast should be divided into 4 levels: heaven, earth, profound, and yellow. The yellow-ranked divine beast was the lowest level divine beast. As for what Mother Earth was, Niet Tian could not guess it. However, he learned an important piece of information from Wang Fuling's words. The silkworm crystal was an extremely precious thing. Chapter 1379. After hearing Wang Fuling's words, Niet Tian became very interested in the Earth's silkworm crystal. He speculated that the crystal definitely contained rich divine power. Divine power. This was the power that Niet Tian and the others needed the most at present. Of course. Wang Fuling glanced at Niet Tian and said, "The Earth's silkworm crystal is a very precious item. When a martial artist absorbs the crystal's power, it can greatly shorten the time to condense a divine spark." "I see." Niet Tian nodded slightly, the corners of his mouth curling into a strange smile. He felt that if Mo, Qianjun, and Zhou Qiansheng could obtain the crystal, they could definitely condense a divine spark in a few years or even a few months. After all, the two had already absorbed some divine power and stayed at peak Heavenly Emperor realm for a very long time. In Niet Tian's eyes, Mo, Qianjun, and Zhou Qiansheng's talent was absolutely not below Xue Wushuang's. Since the latter could condense a divine spark in 20 years, then Mo, Qianjun, and Zhou Qiansheng could condense a divine spark in an even shorter time. However, the Earth silkworms were hunted by Wang Fuling and the others, so the crystal should also belong to them. Originally, they could have hunted more crystal, but sadly, Niet Tian and the others had disrupted the plan. Hence, there were only these 3 Earth silkworms in front of them. "Brother Wang, I just heard Lord Ding say that you hunted the Earth silkworms to obtain the crystal for one person. Is that right?" Niet Tian's eyes flickered, and he suddenly asked. Just now, in his rage, Ding Yuan seemed to have said that without the Earth silkworm crystal, eldest young Mrs. Life would be in danger. Wang Fuling nodded solemnly, lowering his guard against Niet Tian. He said, "To tell the truth, my little sister was born with a strange disease. She can only survive by relying on the Earth silkworm crystal. I hunted the Earth silkworms to extend her life." Niet Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, somewhat speechless inwardly. The Earth silkworm crystal was such a good thing, but it was used to extend one's life. It was truly a pity. But this also showed that Wang Fuling cared about his sister very much. In truth, Niet Tian was somewhat surprised because he sensed that Wang Fuling was only in his 20s. Why was he so strong? After all, it wasn't easy to condense a godhead, even in a realm. Even if Wang Fuling had started condensing his godhood the moment he was born, he would definitely be a freak. After thinking about it, Niet Tian felt that there was only one possibility, and that was that Wang Fuling's divine deity was not condensed, but stolen. The so-called plundering of divine deity was to directly fuse with a ready-made divine deity from someone else. This was a very cruel method. Niet Tian's guess wasn't wrong, but it wasn't completely correct either. Wang Fuling's godhood wasn't condensed, but it wasn't stolen either. Instead, it was inherited. Inheriting a godhead was very popular in the realms. This was because the godhead of many fallen divine realm martial artists would be preserved, so these godheads became a hot commodity. Even in various large auction houses, godheads were clearly marked items. For example, if Li Bo's physical body was destroyed by Niet Tian before, if he couldn't reform his physical body within a certain period of time, Then the divine sense in his godhead would slowly dissipate and finally become an ownerless godhead, which would become a commodity. Wang Fulin's godhead was precisely bought. But inheriting a godhead had a huge disadvantage. That was, one's strength basically would not have any increase in the future anymore. They would maintain their current strength for life, and it might even decrease somewhat. Another point was that inheriting a godhead, the martial artist's lifespan was only 1% of the person who condensed the godhead, which was also to say that a low-god martial artist, if godhead condensed and formed, then his lifespan was 100,000 years. If inherited, his lifespan was only 1,000 years. Even so, inheriting a godhead was still very popular in the realms. After all, people able to condense a godhead within 1,000 years were still in the minority. The limit of a peak Heavenly Emperor martial artist lifespan was 1,000 years. Within this 1,000 years, to spend several hundred years to reach peak Heavenly Emperor, then condense a godhead in the remaining several hundred years, it was a very difficult thing to most people. That kind of long and boring cultivation process, not everyone could endure it. Brother Wang, I'm very curious. How did you guys know that an earth silkworm would appear here? At this time, Nie Tian's gaze turned slightly intent, and he asked with a curious look. Ding Yuan said that they had already waited here for several months, seemingly specifically waiting for an earth silkworm to appear. Wang Fulin nodded slightly and said, My Wang family has an ancestral method to sense earth silkworms. It's us forcing the earth silkworms out from underground. Otherwise, it's impossible for earth silkworms to break out of the ground. Earth silkworms lived several thousand meters deep underground. If there were no unexpected situations, they would not come out for life. Then can you still force the earth silkworms out now? Nie Tian's eyes flickered. He really wanted to obtain the earth silkworm crystal very much. Can't anymore. Wang Fulin sighed and said, Earth silkworm spirituality is very high. After falling for it once, it won't fall for it again. We're going to look for other places next. Moreover, to force the earth silkworm out is also a very slow process, at least several months' time. Nie Tian had black lines all over his face. He finally understood now why Ding Yuan would be so furious just now. Looks like they indeed spoiled Wang Fulin's important matter. Young master, we're done. We can leave now. At this moment, Ding Yuan's figure appeared and directly came to Wang Fulin's side. As he spoke, he glanced at Nie Tian unhappily. Nie Tian was slightly embarrassed and immediately said, Brother Wang, we've just arrived here and have nowhere to go. Can we go with you? Nie Tian was very curious about what kind of strange illness Wang Fulin's sister had. She actually needed the earth silkworm crystal to prolong her life. He was too embarrassed to say that he was an alchemist because he was from the lower planes. If he said it, he might be ridiculed by others. Brat, you've already harmed us once. Do you want to harm us again? Ding Yuan's face was full of dissatisfaction as he spoke in a cold tone. Uncle Ding. Wang Fulin was still considered modest. He hesitated for a moment and said, Brother Nye, we're going back to Brilliant Sky City for a while. If you don't mind, you can come with us. All right. Nie Tian nodded and smiled. Of course, he wouldn't mind. Zhou Qiansheng and the others looked at Nie Tian suspiciously. They didn't know why the latter was wasting time on Wang Fulin. Only Mo Qianjun looked at Nie Tian strangely. He had already guessed that the latter was interested in the earth silkworm crystal. The people around Wang Fulin were extremely unfriendly towards Nie Tian and the others. Their faces were full of malice. However, Nie Tian had a smile on his face and pretended not to notice. After a moment, the group arrived at the periphery of Brilliant Sky mountain range. They were about to walk out of the mountain range. There's killing intent. At this moment, Nie Tian's expression suddenly changed. He felt a cold wind coming from the void. There was actually frost in the air. A sharp killing intent was suddenly released in the air. Almost at the same time, Cher's beautiful eyes flickered. She was surprised and looked up into the sky. Chapter 1380. In the land of Crimson Moon, at the periphery of the Brilliant Sky mountain range, just as Nie Tian and the others were about to leave, more than a dozen black-robe cultivators suddenly appeared in the void above them. "Be careful!" Nyetian was the first to react. His face darkened, and he roared. He directly slashed out with his sword. Void black flames rolled out, and there was an ear-piercing tearing sound in the air. The overwhelming cold wind was extremely sharp, and it directly shattered Nyetian's sword shadow. Then it turned into cold air and pressed down violently. "What a cold aura!" Wang Feline frowned and then punched out. The violent power condensed into a huge fist shadow in the air, but it was directly frozen by the cold air and then shattered in the void. Everyone hurriedly retreated. The next moment, the cold air rolled down, and the trees and rocks within 1,000 meters were instantly frozen and then cut into pieces by the sharp blades. Nyetian's figure stabilized. Looking at everything in front of him, he could not help but tremble. The cold air was too powerful. It directly raised everything within 1,000 meters to the ground. And such a violent aura was released by more than a dozen black-robed cultivators together. More than a dozen black-clothed figures hovered in the air, staring at Nyetian and the others with cold, murderous eyes. The coldness in their eyes was oppressive. Nyetian's divine sense swept over, and his heart sank. These black-robed cultivators were all divine realm cultivators. The leader's aura was even comparable to Zhao Zi's. He should be an intermediate god expert. This is bad. Nyetian's heart sank, and his eyes could not help but tremble. These black-robed cultivators obviously did not want to kill just now. They just wanted to intimidate them, so no one was injured. Then, the black-clothed man in the lead descended a little, looked at Nyetian with a gloomy gaze, and said coldly, "Are you people from the 14th plane world?" "The 14th plane world?" Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly. He immediately realized that this person might be talking about the divine realm of the heaven realm. It seemed like these people already knew that they would appear, so they had been waiting for them. Nyetian immediately understood that Cher's awakening must have caused a huge commotion that alerted the entire God Realm verse. These people in front of him should be from the 12 shrines. "You are not from the Crimson Moon Divine Palace." It was at this moment that Ding Yuan, who was next to Wang Feline, stepped forward. His eyes suddenly darkened as he said, "Those who are not from the Crimson Moon Divine Palace are not allowed to step into the Crimson Moon Land. This is against the rules of the awakening God Realm." Ding Yuan was quite knowledgeable and had some understanding of the 12 divine palaces. He could already tell that the person in front of him was probably from the Divine Glacial Palace. The Glacial Divine Palace was the sworn enemy of the Crimson Moon Divine Palace. Why would the people of the Glacial Divine Palace appear here? "Oomph." The middle-aged man laughed coldly as his lips curled up in a cold smile. With a wave of his hand, a beam of cold chi pierced through the air, transforming into a sharp blade that flew towards Ding Yuan. Bang! A muffled sound rang out, and Ding Yuan was sent flying before he could even react. A horrifying wound appeared on his body, and he was frozen into a human stick. Not good. Seeing this, Nyetian's heart sank. His figure flickered, and he appeared next to Ding Yuan. A ball of fire surged out of his palm and directly entered Ding Yuan's body. Ding Yuan's stiff face showed a slight reaction. The black-robed man's face sank when he saw this scene. He thought to himself, "This kid's fire is a bit strange. It can actually disperse my icy wind power." The icy wind power was a very strange kind of divine power that contained both the ice attribute and the wind attribute. Fortunately, Nyetian reacted quickly. Otherwise, when the icy wind power invaded Ding Yuan's body, his internal organs would have been frozen in an instant and he would have died without a doubt. Nyetian used the Starry Sky Sacred Flame to help Ding Yuan disperse the icy wind power and save his life. "Thank you." Ding Yuan was still in shock. It took him a long time to recover, and he thanked Nyetian with an embarrassed expression. Nyetian nodded slightly and looked at the black-robed man. He asked in a deep voice, "May I know who you are?" This black-robed man was extremely ruthless. He killed without saying a word. It was clear how cruel he was. A Heavenly Emperor Realm cultivator is actually not afraid of my icy wind power. Interesting. The man did not seem to hear Nyetian's words and muttered to himself. His eyes then landed on Cher, and he said faintly, "But my purpose for coming here is her." Ding Yuan guessed correctly. These people were from the Cold Palace. They had come here for Shui. The leader was called Yongli. He was an outer court elder of the Cold Wind Palace's Cold Wind Palace. He was ordered by the Cold Palace's palace master Lung Feng to come to the Crimson Moon Land to find someone. A few days ago, they had already snatched away a godly realm expert from the Heaven World's celestial realm. If Nyetian was present at that time, he would know that the person who was snatched away by the Cold Palace was none other than Duga and I. This time, Yang Li and the others came for Cher. But to Yang Li's surprise, he also found another godly realm expert, Nyetchio. In addition, Nyetian's strength was also very strange. It was not weaker than an early-stage low-god realm expert. Yang Li even felt that Nyetian's talent was even more terrifying than Cher and Nyetchio. But his purpose for coming here was Cher. Therefore, Nyetian and the others were not in his consideration. Nyetian saw that Yang Li was looking at Cher with a strange gaze. His brows sank and his face darkened. These people were indeed here for Cher. "Little girl, I am the outer court elder of the Cold Palace, Yang Li. I will give you a chance to join the Cold Palace." Yang Li didn't pay any attention to Nyetian. He looked at Shui with a burning gaze and spoke in a low voice. Snow didn't even look at him, completely ignoring his words. She just stood there quietly, like an icy mountain, as if nothing around her could affect her state of mind. It was as if Cher did not care about what was happening in front of her. "Little girl, I am talking to you." Yang Li's eyes darkened. He did not expect Cher to react in such a way. He felt extremely humiliated. The coldness around him intensified, and the surrounding space started to freeze. "Big Sister Rushi, let's go." Shui ignored him and said to Mo Rushi beside her, "Bastard." This time, Yang Li was completely infuriated. He roared and slammed his palm down. Boundless coldness condensed into a giant ice hand and smashed down like a glacier. Yang Li had not lost his mind. He did not dare to hurt Cher because Lung Feng had ordered him to capture her alive. He could tell that Cher cared a lot about Mo Rushi. Therefore, he attacked her directly. "Rushi!" Nyetian's heart sank when he saw this. He let out a cry and soared into the sky. Black flames of nothingness bloomed around him. He thrust his long sword forward, and a flaming sword shadow shot out. Boom! The sword shadow was heavy and bombarded the giant ice hand. A violent explosion sounded, and the giant ice hand was directly shattered. Chapter 1381. My lord, Nyetchio sensed that Nyetian was trapped and cried out in alarm. Immediately after, he transformed into a ball of flames and flew out, forcibly breaking through the frozen space. Nyetian and Nyetchio landed at the same time. They were equally shocked. Yang Li was indeed very powerful. A casual palm strike from him was so terrifying. Yang Li frowned slightly. His face turned gloomy and a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He was afraid that he would injure Cher, so he did not use his full strength. But it would be extremely difficult for an ordinary low god to block his palm strike. Nyetian was just a heavenly emperor, but he was able to block his palm strike. It was really strange. To Yang Li, who was a mid-stage mid-god, it was simply a humiliation. Wang Fulin and the others were also dumbstruck. They did not expect Nyetian's strength to be so frightening. Wang Fulin reckoned that even if he was an early-stage low god, he would not be a match for Nyetian. "Nyetian, are you all right?" At this moment, Cher looked at Nyetian. Her beautiful eyes flickered and she seemed a little impatient. "I'm fine," Nyetian said, and slightly shook his head, indicating to Cher not to attack. There were too many people here. Moreover, there were people from the Divine Cold Palace. It would not be good if they witnessed Cher's strength. Cher knitted her brows slightly. She did not say anything and only nodded. Although she was still unfamiliar with Nyetian, she had a strange feeling about him. Whenever Nyetian was injured, she would feel inexplicably flustered. But whenever Nyetian said something, she would subconsciously accept it. "Little girl, I'll give you one last chance. Will you join the Divine Cold Palace?" At this moment, Yongli had lost his patience. The murderous intent in his eyes intensified. Not interested. This time, Cher finally replied, but it was an extremely cold refusal. Wang Feilin and Ding Yuan stood rooted to the spot. They didn't know who Shui Er and the others were that could make glacial divine palaces people break the agreement between the 12 god palaces and step into the Scarlet Moon land to find them. What was even stranger was that Cher didn't care about the divine cold palace at all. The frigid divine palace was one of the 12 sacred palaces. Cultivators from all realms dreamed of joining one of the 12 sacred palaces. However, Cher didn't care at all. It was as if in her eyes, the 12 shrines were nothing but trash. She didn't even have the desire to look at them. Damn girl, you're courting death. Yongli finally lost his patience. With a roar, killing intent rose from his body. At this moment, Yongli's killing intent had been aroused. The Cold Palace Master had told him that it would be best if he could convince Cher to join the Cold Palace. But if he couldn't, then he would kill her. If you can't get it, then you can only destroy it. Oh! However, at this moment, an extremely playful voice sounded, laughing wildly. The people of the Cold Palace are so overbearing. She doesn't want to join you, so you want to kill her? How can there be such logic in this world? As the voice fell, a figure appeared. It was a short and fat man with a round body. His body was the same size as Jean de Bayo. As soon as the short and fat man appeared, more than a dozen cultivators also appeared behind him, all of them very aggressive. Pang San. When Yongli saw the short and fat man, he was stunned for a moment before shouting out a name. The newcomer was called Pang San, and he was from the Azure Sun Palace. The brilliant Sky Mountain Range was located at the border of several divine palaces. Cher's awakening alarmed the 12 sacred palaces. Those divine palaces that were too far away from the Scarlet Moon land couldn't come, but the divine palaces that were adjacent to the Scarlet Moon land wouldn't give up this opportunity. They all wanted to absorb super geniuses into their divine palaces. Yongli, this is the Scarlet Moon land. It's under the jurisdiction of the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace. Pang San looked at Yongli and laughed. Although the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace is almost dead these past few years, at least the name of the Divine Palace still exists. Aren't you afraid of angering those people by coming to the Scarlet Moon land to snatch people? It's not a good thing to break the rules they set. Pang San's eyes flickered as if he was threatening Yongli. Yongli sneered and said, Pang San, you said that the Cold Palace is snatching people. Then why did you bring so many people here? Pang San laughed and said, the people of the 12 divine palaces all know that the Azure Sun Palace and the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace are friendly. The Palace Master asked me to bring my subordinates to the Scarlet Moon land to have a fellowship party. Do you have any objections? Yongli was so angry that his face was as gloomy as water. He couldn't speak for a while. Only Pang San could come up with such an excuse to have a fellowship party. Even a 3-year-old wouldn't believe it. The Azure Sun Palace and the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace used to have a good relationship in the past, but in the past few hundred years, the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace's power had declined and was on the verge of collapse. At this time, who wouldn't want to take advantage of the situation? If the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace fell, the Azure Sun Palace would not hesitate to take over the territory under their jurisdiction. Tian was stunned watching from the side. It seemed that the Cold Palace was not the only one who had designs on Cher. How can a Medicine King Divine Palace miss out on such a lively event like a fellowship party? Just at this moment, the space trembled slightly and another figure descended from the sky. It was a middle-aged man in white robes. He was handsome and held a folding fan in his hand. He looked gentle and refined, but his eyes were filled with malice. Zhang Qinzong, Pang San and Yongli were stunned at the same time when they saw the person's face. Another divine palace has appeared. Tian frowned at this moment, and his face sank slightly. He said in his heart, this is the Scarlet Moon Land, a place under the jurisdiction of the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace. The people from the other divine palaces have appeared, but the people from the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace have not appeared. It seems that the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace is indeed inferior to the other divine palaces. The people from the Cold Palace the Azure Sun Palace, and the Medicine King Divine Palace had appeared one after another, but the people from the Scarlet Moon Divine Palace had not appeared. This made Nye Tian very depressed. Wang Fulin and the others were completely dumbfounded and petrified on the spot. What was the background of Nye Tian and the others? They had just arrived at the God-shocking domain, and they had already alarmed the people from the three divine palaces. This was too strange. Yang Li looked at Zhang Qinzong from the palace of the Divine Medicine King. His eyes narrowed, and his expression turned ugly. If he had known that the people from the other divine palaces would come so quickly, he would not have delayed and would have directly killed Sher and the others. Unfortunately, it was too late for him to act now. It seems that the huge sword momentum has alarmed a lot of people. Zhang Qinzong's figure landed. He had actually come here alone. His gloomy eyes landed on Sher, and then his eyes flickered as if he was very surprised. Then he smiled and said, "This girl is really powerful. The Medicine King Divine Palace wants her." His faint voice fell, but it was full of overbearing. Zhang Qinzong's words made the scene fall into a dead silence. Everyone looked at him with gloomy eyes. Chapter 1382. As soon as the people from Divine Medicine King Palace arrived, they were extremely overbearing and even directly ignored Cold God Palace and Qingyang God Palace. Yang Li and Pang Xin glanced at each other. Although they were unwilling, they did not stand up to oppose. Obviously, they were very afraid of Zhang Qinzong. Although the 12 palaces were side by side, there were strong and weak ones. They were divided into 3 levels, for upper palaces, for middle palaces, and 4 lower palaces. Red Moon Divine Palace undoubtedly belonged to the 4 lower palaces, but it was at the bottom of the 4 palaces. Qingyang God Palace also belonged to the 4 lower palaces, but it was much stronger than Red Moon Divine Palace. Cold God Palace belonged to the 4 middle palaces and was much stronger than Qingyang God Palace. While Divine Medicine King Palace belonged to the 4 upper palaces, its overall strength was much stronger than Cold God Palace. More importantly, Zhang Qinzong was a ruthless person who killed without batting an eyelid. If Yang Li and Pang Xin dared to stand up against him, he would definitely kill them without hesitation. Zhang Qinzong's strength might not be above Yang Li and Pang Xin, but he dared to kill them. Zhang Qinzong was from Divine Medicine King Palace. It was fine if he killed Yang Li or Pang Xin. Cold God Palace and Qingyang God Palace would not dare to pursue the matter. But if Yang Li or Pang Xin killed Zhang Qinzong, Divine Medicine King Palace would never let it go. This world was cruel, and strength always had the greatest right to speak. "Little girl, come with me." Zhang Qinzong's gaze swept across the crowd and finally locked on Sher. He smiled sinisterly and said, "Joining Divine Medicine King Palace is definitely not a choice that will benefit you for life." "Not interested." Sher glanced cold at Zhang Qinzong and gave the same answer as before. Snow's reply stunned everyone present. Countless gazes focused on her, their faces filled with astonishment. Directly rejecting the invitation of Divine Medicine King Palace, one of the 4 upper palaces was too domineering. Huh? Zhang Qinzong's eyes darkened. He was obviously very angry, but he did not flare up on the spot. Instead, he laughed and said, "Little girl, you may not know what kind of existence Divine Medicine King Palace is. Let me tell you, the Medicine King Divine Palace is the true peak force of the startling God domain. The likes of Icy Cold God Palace and Azure Sun God Palace are nothing in front of the Medicine King Divine Palace." Zhang Qinzong slandered the Divine Cold Palace and the Divine Medicine King Palace in front of Yang Li and Pang Xin, but the latter 2 could only listen. "Young girl, as long as you join our medicine." Zhang Qinzong smiled again. He wanted to continue, but he was interrupted by Guning. "Not interested," Sher said cold. Her eyes were filled with impatience. She didn't want to listen to Zhang Qinzong's nonsense anymore. She directly said to Nye Tian, "Let's go." Nye Tian was stunned, and he complained incessantly in his heart. If he could leave, he would have done so long ago. Sher obviously didn't understand the current situation, but she couldn't be blamed. After all, she was too naive. Zhang Qinzong was ignored again. Finally, he couldn't contain the anger in his heart. His face darkened. He waved the folding fan in his hand in the air, and a huge mighty force was released. It directly shrouded Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned when he sensed something. He moved, wanting to avoid it, but he found that the space around him had been sealed. Boom! The next moment, a huge force fell and shrouded Nie Tian. Boundary! In an instant, Nie Tian realized that he was trapped by Zhang Qinzong's boundary. Nie Tian frowned. He spread out his divine sense and was shocked to find that this boundary was very powerful. It made him feel a suffocating pressure. Nie Tian, Mo Rushi, and the others cried out when they saw Nie Tian was trapped. Zhang Qinzong was a mid-stage, mid-god expert, almost 2 great realms higher than Nie Tian. How could Nie Tian fight him? At the sight of this, Shui Er's eyes flickered, and a chilling expression appeared on her exquisite face. Little girl, I will ask you again. Are you willing to join the Divine Medicine King Palace? Zhang Qinzong smiled sinisterly. He looked coldly at Nie Tian and said, Pay attention. Your answer will determine whether he lives or not. The boundary deployed by Zhang Qinzong was enough to suppress a mid-stage low-god expert to death. Nie Tian only had the strength of a heavenly emperor. Zhang Qinzong certainly didn't think that Nie Tian could withstand the suppression of the boundary. Zhang Qinzong could see that Cher seemed to be very worried about Nie Tian. That was why she used the latter as a threat. A bitter smile appeared at the corner of Nie Tian's mouth as he stood in the ward. He had never expected that he would be used as a bargaining chip one day, but he quickly calmed down. He activated the holographic divine veins and carefully sensed the boundary above his head, trying to find its weak point. Cher turned to look at Nie Tian. Her beautiful eyes flickered. Then she stared at Zhang Qinzong and said, Let him go. I can let him go, but you have to come with me, Zhang Qinzong said with a sinister smile. Yang Li, Pang San, and the others felt a chill in their hearts when they saw Zhang Qinzong smile. They knew Zhang Qinzong very well, and knew that even if Shui left with him, he would still die beyond the shadow of a doubt. You've angered me. Cher's eyes were as calm as water. She suddenly opened her mouth, and a blood-red long sword appeared in her hand. An enormous sword momentum soared into the sky, as though it was going to tear the world apart. The surrounding people retreated under the impact of the sword momentum. Oh no, Cher is going to attack. Nie Tian's heart sank when he saw that Cher was enraged. He really didn't want to see Cher expose her strength. Moreover, he wasn't sure if Cher was a match for Zhang Qinzong. Although Cher had once defeated Dugu Ni with a single strike, Dugu Ni and Zhang Qinzong were clearly not on the same level. You want to fight me? Zhang Qinzong coldly snickered. Very well. Let me test your strength and see how strong you are. I'll defeat you with a single strike. Cher didn't seem to hear Zhang Qinzong's words. The corner of her mouth slightly trembled. She repeated what she said when she fought against Dugu Ni. How arrogant! Zhang Qinzong creased his brows. Even Lord Zheng would be enraged to be looked down upon by an early-stage low god. Little girl, today I'll let you know that there's always someone better than you out there. Zhang Qinzong bellowed and swept the folding fan in his hand horizontally. An earth-shattering wave surged out and turned into thousands upon thousands of raging waves that surged towards Cher. The attack of a mid-stage mid-god was extremely majestic, like the mountains and the seas, forcing the crowd to retreat. Watch out, Cher. Nie Tian's eyes darkened when he saw this scene. Immediately, Swordwell surged out from his body. A murderous swordwell bloomed and bombarded the invisible boundary. Boom! A loud and crisp sound rang out, and the barrier shattered in response. At the same time, Cher's figure soared into the sky. She thrust out the long sword in her hand, and a crimson sword shadow appeared. It was as though a vast expanse of red had covered half the sky. The violent sword momentum exploded, and a blood-red swordwell surged out to meet the raging waves in the sky. Rumble. The next moment, a loud explosion was heard in the sky, followed by an ear-piercing noise. The figures of Cher and Zhang Qinzong were completely submerged in the raging airwaves. The crowd stared blankly at the void. Their eyes were dull and lifeless. After a long time, the airwaves in the sky dissipated, and two figures appeared, standing in the void. When the crowd saw the two figures, they were immediately petrified. High up in the sky, Zhang Qinzong was covered in blood and looked extremely miserable. Chapter 1383. On the outskirts of the brilliant sky mountain range, all eyes were staring at the two silhouettes in the void. They were dumbfounded, and their expressions were lifeless. Zhang Qinzong was defeated. A mid-stage mid-god from the Palace of Divine Medicine King was defeated by an early-stage low-god. Moreover, he was defeated in such a straightforward manner. Just one sword strike, and he was seriously injured. If they did not see it with their own eyes, they would never believe it. This. After a long while, the crowd came to their senses and gasped in unison. Their faces were still filled with shock. Their expressions were saying, "How is this possible?" In everyone's eyes, the scene before their eyes was impossible. Cher only had the strength of an early-stage low-god, while Zhang Qinzong had the strength of a mid-stage mid-god. If the two were separated by a minor realm, it would be understandable. But the two were separated by a major realm and a minor realm. Even Yang Li and Pang San, who were experts who had seen countless battles between godly state martial artists, were shocked at this moment. For a god realm warrior to be able to skip a minor realm was already considered a genius. Someone like Shui, who was able to skip an entire realm and a minor realm, was simply a freakish genius. The most terrifying thing was that the crowd could not understand how Cher defeated Zhang Qinzong. No matter from which aspect, Zhang Qinzong's strength was far above Cher's. Nie Tian was also stunned. His mouth was wide open, and he couldn't make a sound for a long time. Cher could defeat Dugu Ni because she could ignore the weakening of the 100 virtual body. In addition, she had the power of the 3 lives meridian and the suppression of the godhead. Therefore, it was still normal. But now, Cher defeated Zhang Qinzong with one sword strike. This was extremely abnormal. You, puff. Just at this moment, Zhang Qinzong opened his mouth. But as soon as he opened his mouth, his body trembled, and he spurted out a mouthful of blood. His face turned as pale as paper. But he still raised his head and looked at Cher with a frightened face. He said a few words, "Your sword art realm, sword art realm." Although Zhang Qinzong hadn't finished speaking, Nie Tian was stunned, and then he understood. Cher had defeated Zhang Qinzong with a single sword strike by relying on her sword Dao realm. Whether it was martial physique or godhead, Cher was below Zhang Qinzong. The reason why she could defeat him with a single sword strike was because of her sword Dao realm. As far as Nie Tian knew, the highest level of insight into the Dao of the sword was Omega Sword Mysteries. However, he had discovered long ago that each time Cher struck out with her sword intent would erupt with terrifying power. It was far beyond what an ordinary profound swordsman could compare to. There was no doubt that there was a higher level of the sword Dao above the sword profundity. It seemed that after Cher absorbed Wan Jian's legacy and awakened Wan Jian's bloodline, she had not only gained strength, but also an extraordinary level of swordsmanship. However, Nie Tian couldn't imagine what level Cher's sword Dao had reached at this moment. With his current strength and realm, he would probably be left in the dust. Cher's expression was calm. She didn't even look at Zhang Qinzong. She said indifferently, "If I wanted to kill you, you would already be a corpse by now. Now, we are leaving this place. Does anyone have any objections?" Her calm voice sounded like a clap of thunder from the ninth heaven, exploding in everyone's ears. It was obvious that Cher had not used her full strength in that sword strike. She had held back. An early-stage low-god, a mid-stage mid-god, and she had held back. It was a mystery what the limit of Cher's strength was. Nie Tian was shocked. His eyes trembled violently. He was thinking, if Nie Xiao hadn't injected the seal left behind by the Sword Elder into Cher's body, how terrifying would Cher's strength be at this moment? At the very least, she would be comparable to a high god. Nie Tian said in his heart. He knew that the seal had greatly suppressed Cher's strength. He even felt that if it wasn't for the seal in Cher's body, she would have been a top-notch expert that could shock the entire divine realms. Cher is really terrifying. I must find the Emperor of the Underworld that N.I. Jamming mentioned as soon as possible and figure out Cher's true identity. Nye Tian said in his heart. He looked somewhat excited. Cher's figure landed beside Mo Rushi. Her expression became gentle again. She smiled faintly and said, Sister Rushi, let's go. The blood of these people is too dirty. I don't want to stay here. Nye Tian was speechless. The current state of Cher was completely different from the state of a swordsman who defeated Zhang Qinzong. Nye Tian. Mo Rushi finally reacted. She looked at Nye Tian and called out softly, Yes, let's go. Nye Tian nodded slightly. He was ready to leave this place first. At this moment, Zhang Qinzong's eyes suddenly turned to Nye Tian. His eyes suddenly trembled and his face was full of astonishment. He had clearly trapped Nye Tian with a boundary. How did the latter escape? The power of the boundary was enough to oppress a mid-stage low god to death. In order to break through the boundary, one must at least have the strength of a mid-god. How could Nye Tian, a mere heavenly emperor realm martial artist, break through his boundary? This kid is also a monster. Zhang Qinzong's eyes flickered violently. His voice was trembling in his heart. He even felt that if Nye Tian advanced to the divine realm, he might be even more terrifying than Cher. No! Suddenly, Zhang Qinzong roared in his heart and shouted, We must inform Palace Lord of these people. If they really join Red Moon Divine Palace, I'm afraid there will be great changes in this year's grand competition of the 12 Shrines. If Nye Tian and Cher joined Red Moon Divine Palace, with just these two people, Red Moon Divine Palace would be able to achieve good results in the Heavenly Emperor Realm competition and the Low God ranking competition. Zhang Qinzong even felt that judging by Nye Tian and Cher's strength, they could even take the first place on the Heavenly Emperor list and the Low God list. If that was really the case, Red Moon Divine Palace would soar to the sky. No, I absolutely cannot allow this to happen. Zhang Qinzong screamed in his heart. Then his figure moved, and he left immediately. Zhang Qinzong's sudden departure made Nye Tian's eyes narrow. He felt a little strange. At this moment, the people from Arctic Divine Palace and Xinjiang Divine Palace also understood something and quickly left. Yang Li and Pang San thought of the situation that Zhang Qinzong was thinking of and immediately left, ready to return to the palace to report everything. Even Zhang Qinzong was defeated by Cher. Yang Li and Pang San, of course, would not ask for trouble. In the blink of an eye, the people from the three major divine palaces disappeared, leaving only Nye Tian and his group. This is bad. I'm afraid the people from the three major divine palaces will not let Cher go. Nye Tian frowned, and his face became much gloomier. At this moment, he finally understood why the Sword Elder, Sakura, N.I. Jamming, and the others had repeatedly warned him not to let Cher take action. Because Cher's strength was really too strong. She could defeat a mid-stage mid-god expert with a casual move. It would be strange if such strange strength did not attract attention. I have to go to Red Moon Divine Palace as soon as possible. That place is still considered a safe place. Nye Tian said in his heart. He immediately called Wang Fulin and the others to leave. Wang Fulin, Ding Yuan, and the others finally reacted. They looked at Nye Tian and the others in shock. They actually subconsciously distanced themselves from Cher, not daring to approach her. Chapter 1384. After a while, Nye Tian and the others finally walked out of the Brilliant Sky mountain range and soon arrived at Brilliant Sky City. Along the way, he talked a lot with Wang Fulin and learned that Wang Fulin's father was the city lord of Brilliant Sky City. Brilliant Sky City was just a small city in the entire Scarlet Moonland. It was not strong. However, this place was a mix of good and bad people. After all, it was located at the border of several divine palaces. Ding Yuan, who was next to Wang Fulin, was the city lord mansion's housekeeper and the former's personal guard. Under Wang Fulin's lead, Nye Tian and the others soon arrived at the city lord mansion. Just as they were about to enter the mansion, Nye Tian frowned and suddenly looked up into the sky. Above the void, the space shook slightly. Then, several figures appeared, each with a powerful aura. Niet Tian saw the face of the person in the lead, but he smiled bitterly and murmured, "They're finally here. This efficiency is too low." The person in the sky was none other than Zhao Zi. "Mr. Niet Tian, you've finally arrived at the territory." As soon as Zhao Zi saw Niet Tian and the others, he laughed heartily and waved his hand. The people behind him disappeared into the void, hiding themselves. "Mr. Zhao, you're too late." Niet Tian smiled speechlessly. Looking at Zhao Zi's reaction, he obviously didn't know that the other divine palaces had appeared. Zhao Zi's figure landed and frowned slightly. Seeing that Niet Tian and the others had strange expressions, he couldn't help saying, "Did the icy, cold divine palace appear again?" A few days ago, when Dugu and I came to Scarlet Moon Land, Zhao Zi was ordered to find him, but the icy, cold divine palace took him away first. For this, he was reprimanded by Qi Yefeng. Looking at Niet Tian's reaction now, it was obvious that he had met the icy, cold divine palace. Not only the people from the icy, cold palace, but also the people from the Qingyang Palace and the Medicine King divine palace. Niet Tian shook his head and smiled, briefly explaining what had happened before. As soon as Zhao Zi heard Niet Tian's words, her face sank and she roared, "These 3 divine palaces are too impudent." They actually ignored the agreement between the 12 divine palaces and openly came to the Scarlet Moon Land to snatch people. They simply don't put our Scarlet Moon divine palace in their eyes. Niet Tian shook his head and smiled. He glanced at Zhao Zi speechlessly and thought to himself, "With the efficiency of the Crimson Moon divine palace, even I wouldn't put them in my eyes." The Brilliant Sky mountain range was the territory of the Scarlet Moon divine palace, but Zhao Zi and the rest were the last to arrive. Compared to the other divine palaces, the Scarlet Moon divine palace was far inferior. "Mr. Niet Tian, are you all right?" Zhao Zi glanced at Niet Tian and the others. When he saw that Niet Tian and the others were fine, he was puzzled. He was very curious about how Niet Tian and the others could escape under the nose of the 3 divine palaces. "It's fine." Niet Tian nodded slightly and didn't explain too much. He was still depressed about Cher exposing her strength. So how could he tell the truth to Zhao Zi? Even if he said so, Zhao Zi probably wouldn't believe him. Niet Tian had already told Wang Feline not to tell anyone about Cher. "Brother Nye, this is..." At this time, Wang Feline reacted and walked to Niet Tian's side. "Brother Wang, this is the outer sect elder of the Red Moon Divine Palace, Lord Zhao Zi." Niet Tian quickly introduced to Wang Feline and said, "Lord Zhao, this is the young city lord of the Brilliant Sky City, Lord Wang Feline." Zhao Zi took a glance at Wang Feline and seemed to have recalled something. He said, "Wang Qianyuan is your father, right?" "Yes, my father." Wang Feline was stunned. He didn't expect Zhao Zi to know his father. He bowed and said, "Do you know my father? Your father had once visited the Red Moon Divine Palace. It seemed to be for your sister's strange illness. However, the Pill Hall Elder didn't meet him." Zhao Zi said plainly. For a small force like the Brilliant Sky City, it was indeed difficult for them to meet the Red Moon Divine Palace Elder. When Wang Feline heard Zhao Zi's words, his expression suddenly changed. He was furious and said solemnly, "So my father was injured by the Red Moon Divine Palace. No wonder he wasn't willing to tell me." And Zhao Zi noticed that Wang Feline's mood wasn't right. He frowned and said, "Young man, watch your words. Don't slander the Red Moon Divine Palace. When your father came to the Red Moon Divine Palace, I was the one in charge of receiving him. The Pill Hall Elder is an important figure. It's reasonable that he didn't have the time to meet him. When did he injure him?" Zhao Zi remembered that 5 to 6 years ago, Wang Qianyuan brought a 10-year-old girl to the Red Moon Divine Palace and requested to meet the Pill Hall Elder. He was in charge of bringing Wang Qianyuan to the Pill Hall. As for what happened after that, he didn't know. However, Wang Feline said that Wang Qianyuan was injured by someone. This was obviously impossible. Why would I slander the Red Moon Divine Palace? Wang Feline frowned and said solemnly, "Back then, my father brought my sister to the Red Moon Divine Palace to seek medical treatment. He brought along 100 silkworm crystals. However, when my father returned, the silkworm crystals were snatched away. He was also severely injured and is still bedridden. Do you think I'll make up a story? This. Zhao Zi's expression sank. He was obviously embarrassed. Wang Felin's mood wasn't fake. Could it be that something really happened back then? When Ye Tian heard this, his expression changed slightly. It was obvious that he was angry. He could faintly tell that Wang Qinyuan brought the silkworm crystals to the Red Moon Divine Palace to seek medical treatment. The people from the Red Moon Divine Palace must have taken a fancy to his silkworm crystals and snatched them away. Then, they injured him and chased him out of the Red Moon Divine Palace. If the Red Moon Divine Palace really did that, it would be too much. It's fine if he couldn't seek medical treatment, but why did he snatch someone's things and injure him? Young Master Wang, the silkworm crystals you mentioned, are they the Earth's silkworm crystals? At this moment, Zhao Zi's eyes flickered and he suddenly asked. Yes. Wang Felin's attitude changed completely. He replied cold. That's impossible. Zhao Zi raised his eyebrows and said, Earthworms live thousands of meters underground. Even a high god would have to expend a great deal of effort to force them out. Could it be that your father's strength is stronger than that of a high god? He couldn't even force the Earth's silkworm out. How could he use 100 silkworm crystals to seek medical treatment? My Wang family has an ancestral method that can force the Earth's silkworm out. Those 100 silkworm crystals were accumulated by my father for 6 years. Do you think I would lie? Wang Felin was extremely angry. He didn't expect that Zhao Zi would still doubt him. Lord Zhao. Zhao Zi still wanted to say something, but he was stopped by Nie Tian. The latter said, I can prove that the Wang family indeed has a unique method to hunt the Earth's silkworm. It's not difficult for the Wang family to obtain 100 silkworm crystals. Nie Tian had seen the method Wang Fulin used to hunt the Earth's silkworm with his own eyes. The latter was absolutely not lying. This. Zhao Zi was stunned. He didn't expect that Nie Tian would speak up for Wang Felin. Chapter 1385. Wang Felin was stunned when he heard Nie Tian's words. From the latter's tone, it seemed that he did not even put the Red Moon Palace Master in his eyes. Zhao Zi was also taken aback as he fixed Nie Tian with an embarrassed look on his face. He knew that Nie Tian must be angry. Brother Wang, let's go inside and talk. Nie Tian nodded slightly and said solemnly. He dared to say such a thing, of course. He had confidence in his heart. He naturally knew that his strength was completely incomparable to the Red Moon Palace Master. But he also knew that the current Red Moon Divine Palace was in a precarious situation. Icy Cold Divine Palace, Qingyang Divine Palace, and Medicine King Divine Palace had openly come to the Red Moon Divine Palace's territory to show off their strength, but the Red Moon Divine Palace didn't even have a chance to retaliate. This showed how weak they were. It was precisely because of this that Nie Tian had the capital to talk to the Red Moon Palace Master fairly. The next grand competition of the 12 Divine Palaces would determine the survival of the Red Moon Divine Palace. And the key figures in this grand competition were Nie Tian and the others. Nie Tian had a keen sense of smell and had already perceived this from Zhao Zi's attitude towards him. After a while, Nie Tian and the others came to the main hall of the City Lord Mansion. Brother Nie, I've already asked Uncle Ding to invite my father. Please wait a moment. Wang Felin nodded slightly and smiled at Nie Tian. Zhao Zi looked slightly nervous. He had a faint sense of foreboding. What Wang Felin said just now was very likely to be true. He hoped that this matter would not change Nie Tian's attitude towards the Red Moon Divine Palace. Not long after, Ding Yuan's figure appeared, and 2 servants of the City Lord Mansion carried a chair into the hall. Sitting on it was a middle-aged man with an old face. He was thin and pale, and it was obvious that he had been suffering from illness for a long time. Father! Wang Felin immediately stood up, bowed slightly to the middle-aged man, and introduced him to Nie Tian. Brother Nie, this is my father. When Nie Tian saw Wang Qinyuan's morbid state, his eyes tightened and his face became even gloomier. Young Master Nie, this old man is ill and unable to stand. Forgive me for my lack of manners. Wang Qinyuan nodded slightly to Nie Tian. Ding Yuan had just told him some things, so he had some understanding of Nie Tian's identity. City Lord Wang is too polite. Nie Tian nodded slightly. Wang Qianyuan seemed to be an honest and dutiful person. It seemed that what Wang Feline had said was true. At this moment, Wang Qianyuan looked at Zhao Zi with a very serious expression. But he still spoke. Lord Zhao, long time no see. City Lord Wang. Zhao Zi frowned when she saw that Wang Qianyuan was injured so badly. Her face darkened a lot. All those years ago, Wang Qianyuan was a godly realm expert no matter what. Yet now, he was bedridden. How could they not sigh? City Lord Wang, I want to know what happened back then. Please tell me in detail. Nie Tian glanced at Zhao Zi and said to Wang Qianyuan, sigh. Wang Qianyuan let out a long sigh. It was obvious that he was avoiding the topic. He said it's all in the past. Don't mention it. Nie Tian frowned. Of course, he understood that Wang Qianyuan didn't want to offend the Red Moon Divine Palace. This was also the reason why he didn't tell the truth to Wang Feline all these years. City Lord Wang, tell me, if someone from the Red Moon Divine Palace is greedy for your silkworm crystal and injured him, I will personally report to the palace lord and seek justice for you. Zhao Zi stepped forward and said with a serious expression. He was a smart person. If he didn't say something at this time, Nie Tian's impression of the Red Moon Divine Palace would be even worse. Lord Zhao, Wang Qianyuan heard Zhao Zi's words. His eyes trembled and revealed a touch of passion. He was injured and bedridden for several years. Such humiliation was hard to swallow. But for the Wang family, he still endured it. Now that Zhao Zi said such words, he was very excited. Father, just say it. I believe Mr. Nie will seek justice for us. Wang Feline nodded and said. Although he didn't know who Nie Tian was, Wang Feline could feel a strong confidence from him. Hence, he chose to believe in Nie Tian. All right, Wang Qianyuan let out a long breath. His eyes shone with brilliance. He finally told his father what happened in the past, when he brought his daughter, Wang Haolin, to the Red Moon Divine Palace for treatment. The Pill Hall's elder refused to treat Wang Haolin. However, he asked him to leave 100 silkworm crystals behind. He couldn't take it anymore and argued with the people from the Pill Hall. In the end, he was heavily injured by them. After returning to the brilliant Sky City, he was bedridden. What a Pill Hall's elder! After listening to Wang Qianyuan's words, Nie Tian let out a low roar. His eyes were cold and stern. He was suppressing a huge anger in his heart. The Red Moon Divine Palace's elder did such a thing. What's the difference between him and a bandit? Zhou Qiansheng was even more furious. He cursed, "Is the Red Moon Divine Palace a bandit's nest?" Zhao Zi's face was extremely embarrassed. He didn't expect such a thing to happen. A dignified Pill Hall's elder actually became a bandit for 100 silkworm crystals. It was really despicable. Lord Zhao, what do you have to say for yourself? Nie Tian's eyes were like torches. He stared at Zhao Zi and asked in a cold tone, Mr. Nie Tian, don't worry. I will definitely report this matter to the palace lord. If everything is true, I believe the palace lord will punish the Pill Hall's elder severely. Zhao Zi immediately expressed his stance. He was very decisive. City Lord Wang, do you know the name of the elder? Nie Tian's eyes turned dark. He looked at Wang Qianyuan and couldn't help but ask. I don't know. Wang Qianyuan shook his head and said, I only heard the people from the Red Moon Divine Palace addressing the elder as Elder Wei. Elder Wei? When Nie Tian heard the name, he immediately thought of a person. Wei Sun. Wei Jinren. At this moment, Zhao Zi's eyes flashed, and he said name. The Red Moon Divine Palace's Pill Hall had 8 outer sect elders and 1 inner sect elder. But there was only one Elder Wei, and that was Wei Jinren. Moreover, Wei Jinren was the inner sect elder of the Pill Hall. He also had a son, which was Wei Senator Wei Jinren, was extremely overbearing in the Red Moon Divine Palace. No one expected him to do such a thing. At this moment, Zhao Zi's expression turned even uglier. At the same time, he was a little worried. He knew that Wei Jinren had a huge influence in the Red Moon Divine Palace. If he were to touch this person, he might cause a huge commotion in the Red Moon Divine Palace. The Red Moon Divine Palace was already in troubled times. If they were to touch an inner sect elder now, it would be like adding snow to snow. Nie Tian took a look at Zhao Zi and asked with a low voice, Lord Zhao, is this Elder Wei related to Wei Sun? He is Wei Sin's father. Zhao Zi's eyes turned serious and said solemnly. Nie Tian laughed and didn't look at Zhao Zi anymore. Instead, he said to Wang Qianyuan, City Lord Wang, don't worry. Since Lord Zhao knows about this, he will definitely report this to the Red Moon Palace Lord. He will definitely give you justice. It was obvious that he wasn't saying this to Wang Qianyuan, but to Zhao Zi. Thank you, Lord Zhao, for helping me. Wang Qianyuan wasn't stupid. He nodded slightly and bowed to Zhao Zi. Chapter 1386. In the main hall, Nie Tian looked at Zhao Zi and said, Lord Zhao, I think the palace lord will handle this matter impartially and won't disappoint me. Of course, of course. Zhao Zi smiled awkwardly. The cold sweat on his forehead flowed down to his cheeks. On one side was Nie Tian, and on the other side was an inner sect elder. This really put Zhao Zi in a difficult position. He could only report this matter to the palace lord and see how the latter would deal with it. City Lord Wang, what kind of strange illness does your daughter have? I want to take a look. Is it convenient? At this moment, Nie Tian looked at Wang Qianyuan and suddenly asked. Nie Tian was very curious. What kind of illness did Miss Wang have that even the Red Moon Divine Palace's Pill Hall elder wasn't willing to treat? If it was a normal illness, Wei Jinren might treat it casually. However, he didn't treat it because Miss Wang's illness was not normal. Wang Qianyuan frowned and seemed to be in a difficult position. It seemed like he didn't want Nie Tian to see his daughter. City Lord Wang, when Nie Tian was in the Heaven World's God Realm, he was a rank 9 alchemist. Although he is a little worse than the alchemists in your territory, he has seen many strange illnesses. He might be able to cure your daughter's illness. Jiu Qinsheng laughed and said. Wang Qianyuan was slightly stunned. He looked at Nie Tian suspiciously. He didn't expect Nie Tian to be an alchemist. Even in the realms, there weren't many 9th grade spirit alchemists at this level. In the territory, the alchemists in the plain world were called alchemists. Above alchemists were divine alchemists. Nie Tian was so young, but he was actually a rank 9 alchemist. This really surprised Wang Qianyuan. Father, let Mr. Nie take a look. At this moment, Wang Feline also said, All right. Wang Qianyuan frowned and finally nodded in agreement. He said, Mr. Nie, please follow me. Nie Tian followed Wang Qianyuan and left. The others waited in the main hall. After a short moment, Nie Tian arrived at a remote small courtyard. The surroundings were actually desolate, and it revealed a desolate aura. He frowned and wondered why Wang Qianyuan would let his daughter live in such a place. Mr. Nie, my daughter is in the room. She's not in a good mood. Please forgive her. Wang Qianyuan pointed to a room in the courtyard and shouted, Hao Lin, I'm your father. I brought an alchemist to treat you. No, a sharp roar suddenly came from the room. I don't want to see anyone. Let them go. Wang Qianyuan looked at Nie Tian helplessly, his heart aching. Nie Tian looked even more puzzled. What kind of illness did Wang Haolin have? Why did she not want to see people? He thought for a moment and immediately strode forward to the door and lightly said, Miss Wang, I'm an alchemist. I'm here to treat your illness. I'm coming in now. Don't come in. A shrill roar came from the room once again, and then a cloud of black mist spread out, directly enveloping Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned. He sensed a very violent aura from this mist. It seemed to be a very strange power, with a sense of desolation. It was somewhat similar to the desolation forbidden power in the forbidden ice and snowstone that imprisoned Rui Qinyu. Nie Tian's body shook, dispelled the mist, and then directly pushed the door open and stepped in. Don't come in. Get out, get out. In the room, a girl covered her face and shouted in panic, as if she was about to cry. Miss Wang, don't be nervous. I'm not a bad person. Nie Tian said softly. He used his divine sense to probe, but his whole body frowned, and his face was not small. Although Wang Haolin covered her face, Nie Tian still saw her face clearly. Nye Tian sensed that Wang Haolin was about 15 or 16 years old, but her appearance was very old. Her face was full of wrinkles, and her skin was also dry and shriveled. She didn't look like a 15 or 16 years old girl at all, but like an old man who was approaching the end of his life. Nye Tian was stunned on the spot. He opened his mouth wide, but couldn't say a word. He had seen many strange diseases, but it was absolutely the first time that he had seen a case like Wang Haolin's age and the appearance of an old man. Nye Tian also knew a lot about all kinds of strange diseases in his previous life, but he had never seen a description of the situation in front of him. Get out, get out. I don't want you to see me like this. Wang Haolin shouted loudly, looking very irritable. Miss Wang, I'm sorry. I'll go out right now. Nye Tian reacted, took 2 steps back, left the room, and closed the door. At this time, he finally understood why Wang Qinyuan was unwilling to let him see Wang Haolin. Wang Haolin was just a teenage girl. Letting others see her old appearance was really a big blow. Mr. Nye, I'm really sorry. Did my daughter scare you? Wang Qinyuan felt very guilty and said to Nye Tian. Nye Tian shook his head slightly. His heart was thinking about Wang Haolin's symptoms, but no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't think of anything. Wang Haolin's disease was too strange, and it made him feel very troubled. Nye Tian. At this time, a voice suddenly sounded in Nye Tian's mind. Sakura. Sakura, do you know what disease this is? Nye Tian was suddenly stunned. Only now did he remember that there was an old monster who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years by his side. Disease? Sakura laughed strangely and said, Kid, you really know how to joke. If the desolate body is a disease, then this seat also wants to get sick. Desolate body. Nye Tian was stunned and immediately understood that Wang Haolin was not suffering from a strange disease, but a kind of spirit body of heaven and earth. In fact, he also thought about the spirit body of heaven and earth just now, but he didn't think of it. The desolate body is one of the 4 ancient taboo bodies. Although it is a little weaker than the sage body, it is not weak by much. Sakura laughed and said, This little girl was just born at the wrong time. If she was born hundreds of thousands of years ago, she would definitely be fought by those old monsters to be accepted as a disciple. Unfortunately, it is not so easy now. What do you mean? Nye Tian frowned and looked puzzled. The desolate body is a taboo body. The body will constantly produce the power of desolation and can devour all kinds of vitality. Sakura sighed and said, This little girl looks like an old person at the age of 10. Her vitality has been devoured by the power of desolation. If she hadn't absorbed the power of the silkworm crystal all year round, she would have died long ago. Nye Tian was stunned. He had felt a strange power in Wang Haolin's body just now. The power of desolation was very similar to the forbidden power of desolation of the ice and snowstone. They could both devour vitality. However, Nye Tian felt that the power of desolation was even more terrifying than the forbidden power of desolation. Sakura, then how do I save her now? Nye Tian became cold and asked solemnly. Save her. Sakura laughed as if he had heard a joke and said, Do you think the body of desolation is a joke? Unless the desolate ancestor is reborn, even the sage can't save her. The power of desolation in her body can no longer be suppressed. Even if she starts to cultivate the 9 heavens desolation art immediately, it will be useless. Just wait for death.